Chapter 15 Thera Pest. Every 6 months or so, my therapist is required to check in on me and how I'm doing in civilization. When she comes around, I put on a show to make it seem like I've fully evolved to human life. I knew she would be coming by today, so I stayed at my foster home instead of going to visit Zim like I always do. The doorbell rang at around 11 o'clock that morning, and I immediately rose to 2 feet and went to answer it. Before I opened the door, I looked at my foster parents on the couch, television on as it is 24/7 here. "You know that, Dr. Bubes," I addressed them. "You should turn off the picture box." My foster mom groaned with irritation before pulling the clicker out of her butt and turning off the ad for the new game Slave 2. I opened the door to see the overly cheerful blonde woman in a lilac pantsuit. "Elizabeth!" she squealed and gave me a hug. "Look how much you've grown since I last saw you. Oh, you must be eating plenty of those whole grains we talked about." She walked inside, and my foster dad suddenly sat up and started flexing his imaginary muscles. My foster mom gave him a bit of a smack in the arm and glared at him. "Robert, Abigail, how are you?" Dr. Bubes gave them both a hug, which my foster dad really enjoyed, and then she took a seat in the only other chair in the room beside the couch. I sat on my legs on the floor on the other side of the couch. "Nice to see you again, Doctor." I nodded politely. "So, Elizabeth, how are you enjoying this year at school so far?" Dr. Boobs was the one that gave me that dreadful name, Elizabeth. It was Dib that first started calling me Liz, and I decided I liked that a lot better, mostly because I could actually pronounce it. "This has been a really good year for me, actually," I told her. "It has?" The doctor leaned forward dramatically. "In what way? You're still friends with that large-headed child, aren't you?" "Well, yes, Dib and I are still friends, but I actually made a new friend this year." "Really?" Dr. Boobs pulled out a notepad and started scribbling. "Boy or girl?" "Boy." "Okay, and what's his name?" "Zim. He lives just down the street, and he has the sweetest little puppy." "He does?" Dr. Boobs raised her shoulders with excitement. "Is this Zim in your class?" "Yes, ma'am," I smiled. "He was a new student in beginning of year." "Ooh, and you, Zim, and Dib, all three of you get along?" "Well, not exactly," I shrugged. "Zim and Dib not really like each other." Dr. Boobs put on an over-the-top pout face. "Oh, that's too bad the three of you can't all be friends." "I know," I nodded while looking down, "but I make it work." "How are you liking your teacher this year, Miss Bitters?" "She okay, I guess. Keep everyone in line." Dr. Boobs nodded. "Good, good. And she's not going too fast for you, is she? You understand the material?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at my fosters. "So she's doing well in school?" My foster dad kept grinning like an idiot. "Oh, yes, Miss Boobs. Lizzie is doing just fine." "I'm so glad to hear that." Dr. Boobs grinned that toothy grin of hers. "Have you met her new friend Zim?" "We haven't seen no Zim character," my foster mom said, annoyed. "But she's talked about him plenty, and he sounds nice enough." I haven't actually mentioned Zim to them at all. The only time they've ever seen Dib was at the various parent-teacher nights that have occurred over the past 3 years. They just know to go along with whatever I say to keep Boobs happy, so she doesn't take me and my government money away. "Now, has Elizabeth gone savage at all lately?" She whispered the word savage as if it was a dirty word. "Not at all." Robert shook his head. "She's been very well behaved. No bad reports from school either." "I'm glad to hear you're doing so well, Elizabeth." Dr. Boobs scribbled for a second. Okay, Elizabeth, on a scale of 1 to 5, how often would you say you feel the need to go hunting for your own food? 3, I told her. Okay. And on that same scale, how often would you say you've actually gone out and tried to hunt for your own food? Try. Doctor, I never try. I always succeed my hunts. Which occur how often? 2. I see. Dr. Boob scribbled on her notepad. How often do you feel some sort of aggression towards another person? On a scale of 1 to 5, try 9. 4, I said. Dr. Boobs looked disappointed behind the eyes but kept her smile. Anyone in particular? Anything specific that sets off this aggression? Usually when someone picking on Zim or Dib, but especially Zim. Oh no! Dr. Boobs dropped her smile. People pick on your friend Zim a lot? Do you know why? Well, Zim has skin condition that causes his skin to appear green, and he has a lot of allergies. I guess people are always making fun of him for that. Dib no help either. He calls him an alien. And seeing your friend treated this way upsets you? Dr. Boobs asked. That right, Doctor. I nodded. What sort of thoughts go through your head when you see your friend get picked on? Thoughts of destroying those children by ripping their throats out with my teeth and feeding them to Gur. That he not deserve to be treated that way. I have lots of allergies like him, and I remember how people used to treat me, and I see them treating him same way. Now, have you ever done anything to stop any of this? Usually I yell at kids to stop or something, I shrugged. That usually helped for time being. Do you think there might be a more civilized way to deal with these things? I tilted my head at her. I hated it when she used the C word. Maybe you could try talking with the teacher? Dr. Boobs inched forward in her chair. It is part of her job to deal with bullies. I stared blankly at the woman and her cleavage that was growing deeper from leaning forward. Elizabeth. Promise me that next time people are picking on Zim, you'll talk with the teacher instead of acting like a wild animal. I looked at the woman's feet. Yes, Doctor. Good. She smiled and sat back in her seat. Next question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much would you say you want to go back to your old wolf pack? 1,000,000. 4.9? Dr. Boobs sighed. Elizabeth, we've talked about this. You know you can't go back to the wolf pack. You're a human girl, a very pretty and smart human girl that I think can do great things in civilization. Like make it bow to the Urkin and Wolf Empire. I not know. You can, Elizabeth. Dr. Boob's voice was like that of a mouse letting out one final squeak when you crush it to death in your mouth. I hated her voice. I hated everything about her. You've just got to find something you like about being a human. Surely there must be something. You do have your 2 little friends. I had more friends than real family in my pack. Yeah. I understand you took a test earlier this year that was meant to determine your future career. Do you remember what career was selected for you? Yes, I nodded. Archaeologist. And you went to practice being an archaeologist, didn't you? That right. How do you like that? Her smile was back on her face. It actually was kind of fun. Dr. Boob squeaked with excitement. It was? You think you'll want to go into that field, maybe? Maybe you should go into a field surrounded by 100 wolves where no one can hear you scream. I could. Ooh, So glad my little Elizabeth is figuring out her life, Dr. Boobs squealed. I remember when you couldn't even talk. All you did was bark and growl and crawl around on all fours, but now look at you. Is this over yet? Well, my time is almost up. But before I leave, do you think it would be all right if I went over and met your new friend Zim? I not know, I frowned. Zim shy. Dr. Boob swatted away my answer. Oh, so were you when we first met. Come on, it'll be fine. Dr. Boobs has already met Dib during almost all of her visits in the past 3 years. She thinks he's just as insane as everyone else, but she understands a friend is a friend. She met Professor Membrane once, and he had almost the same reaction to her that my foster dad has. At this age, I'm starting to understand why the men act this way around her, and it sickens me. I sighed. Okay, but before we go, can I quick run to little girl's room? I don't know, Dr. Boob said with a grin. Can you? I stared blankly at her and then pointed over my shoulder towards the bathroom. You know what? I just gonna go. I then slipped away and started calling Zim over my watch. Zim? Zim? Are you there? Zim finally answered excitedly. Liz, what are you doing? I thought you had your meeting with that Thera Pest. I do, but now she won't meet you, I told him. She wants to meet me? Why? Zim asked. I mean, of course she would want to meet someone as amazing as Zim. Look, I told her about my new friend Zim, and now she won't meet you. I promise not take long. Zim pondered. Very well, wolf pup. And that other thing. You know how I cover for you by pretending you not alien? Yes. Well, I need you cover for me by pretending I'm not wolf. For therapist, I must act like normal human that enjoy being normal human. So no walking on fours or talking about taking over world or hunting or anything like that. Got it? This must be painful for you, Zim said as if he was the one in pain. But I shall do it. Good. I be over in a second. Not forget disguise? I shut off the watch and left the bathroom. Zim wasn't wrong. Pretending to be something I'm not was painful. It was probably the biggest reason I hated the woman so much, and I think it's why I relate so much to Zim. Ready? Dr. Boobs beamed. Yes. I led her out the door and down to the greenhouse. It felt so strange to ring the doorbell instead of howl at the house like I'm so used to. Zim answered the door with his zipper-toothed smile. Liz, to what do I owe this pleasant surprise? Hi, Zim. I smiled and waved my fingers. This my therapist, Dr. Boobs. Dr. Boobs, this my friend Zim. The doctor crouched down to Zim's level. Hello, Zim. Elizabeth has told me so much about you. I know things may not seem fair with this unfortunate skin condition of yours, but don't worry. You have a wonderful little friend here and a big, bright future ahead of you. That grin was sickening. Yes, thank you. Zim grinned and nodded awkwardly. It is so very tragic that I, Zim, must be cursed with this condition of the skin, but I try to live my life as normally as possible. She pinched his cheek, and he narrowed his eyes at that. I'm so glad to hear that. The doctor stood and looked at me again. See, Elizabeth? I think you could learn a thing or two from Zim here. I rolled my eyes. Well, it was so nice to meet you, Zim. And Elizabeth, remember what we talked about. She tried to straighten my shirt and fix my hair. Try to stay civilized. After a prolonged goodbye, Dr. Boobs was finally in her car and driving away. When she was out of sight, I shoved Zim aside and stormed into the house. I dropped to fours and angrily paced back and forth in front of the couch, growling. Zim came inside and closed the door. I hate that bark woman. She just makes me so bark. I jumped onto the couch and buried my face in one of the cushions. I did some sort of muffled mix between a howl and a scream. Yes, Zim agreed. That filthy, disgusting pig was absolutely horrible. He made a bunch of gagging sounds. With my face still buried in the cushion of the couch, I felt Zim take a seat beside me. There was some moment of hesitation before Zim's hand placed itself on my shoulder. I removed my face from the cushion and looked up at my best friend. He stared down at me without a word. I had been in a position where my back paws were closest to Zim, and I turned so that my head was nearer to him. Without breaking eye contact, I slowly placed my head upon Zim's lap. For a minute, we both sat stiff, not quite knowing how to react, or how the other would react. After a minute, Zim started stroking my hair, and we both relaxed in this position. Zim's hands were so calm that I couldn't help but close my eyes and just enjoy it. I lost all sense of everything as I fell into a peaceful snooze. That snooze was interrupted maybe an hour later when Gurf suddenly opened the front door sipping a poop drink. I raised my head from Zim's lap and looked at the small robot dog. He only stared at us for a moment before walking into the other room with his little squeaky steps. I looked back up at Zim and could see that he was awoken from his sleep as well. A gentle smile and a blush of darker green grew on his face. I smiled back up at him. Chapter 16. Squishy. I always make sure that I'm out of the way whenever Zim has to contact his alphas. He calls them the almighty tallest. And I thought it would be funny to convince him to wear a bear suit for his next report to the tall alphas. I wish I could have seen the conversation. It must have been hilarious. Later on, he called me down to his lab. Liz, my probes have returned from the neighboring planets. Do you want to see the information they brought back? I now think I have choice. I smiled. Good. Zim said as he took his seat in front of the screen and I sat on the ground beside him. All of Zima's probes information was downloaded and shown on screen. What we saw was a rust-colored landscape that was scattered with structures of pyramids and large faces. Some of this landscape looks unnatural, as though nature was not involved in its formation. Ancient peoples on Earth built things like those. I pointed to the pyramids. But the sensors show no life forms. Zim pondered out loud. Whatever wiped out these Marsoids? Martians, I corrected. Whatever, Zim said, irritated. Whatever wiped out these Martians must have truly been incredible. Incredible enough to maybe assist me in the annihilation of the humans. But wolves do that, I said, confused. Nothing wrong with a little extra hand, Zim said with his eyes closed. He brought out his communicator and told Gur to meet us at the cruiser. When we got to the cruiser, I climbed in beside Zim, and Gur arrived on the other side of his seat. We are going to Mars, Zim announced as the cruiser closed. Gur squealed with excitement and we launched out of the roof towards the night sky. We flew towards Mars and I sat beside Zim excitedly. Get off my head, Gur, Zim told Gur, who was laying on top of Zim's head. I have a good feeling about this lead. I can almost taste the humans being destroyed. It's delicious. I smiled. Tastes like heart of deer. This Mars holds the key, I just know it, Zim continued. New words of praise will have to be invented just so they can get off my head. Gur had found himself back on Zim's head and jumped off. It's okay, Gur, I told the little robot. You can come sleep on my head. Yay! Gert sheared and jumped on my head, covering himself with my hair like a blanket. The taste of impending human annihilation grows stronger in my amazing head, Zim said and started smacking his lips. You truly most amazing, Zim, I told him. There's no one else I'd rather have as my alpha. We landed next to the large face. Zim and I both suited up so that we could survive the atmosphere, and hopped out of the cruiser. I immediately started sniffing around, taking in all the new senses that I'd never encountered before. Zim was climbing the giant face, and I think Gur was fixing a broken Mars rover. I sniffed my way over to one of the pyramids, and it all smelled of something that was ancient and definitely dead. Gur started cheering because he fixed the rover, and Zim told him to come over to him. I still listened from afar, but continued my sniffing. This is pointless. This planet's a rock, a useless wasteland, Zim was saying. Whoever they were, they left no sign of what wiped them out. They just left these stupid structures here to taunt me. I hate them, Zim shouted, and I hope they did. Oh yeah. I continued sniffing around, but the only information I gathered was that there was something very wrong with this place, as if what I was smelling completely disagreed with what I was seeing. Liz! I heard Zim yell. Have you found anything? I ran towards the face and Zim. Zim, I know you think you should quick dismiss planet. There's something different about it, but I not know what. I think we should keep searching. Don't be ridiculous, Zim shouted, holding up a Martian skull. This place is nothing but a pile of dirt. This means more time on Earth with the stench of humanity. Filthy humans! Zim angrily stamped his foot on the nose of the face, and some sort of beeping started. What is that sound? The ground started shaking and I started panicking. I ran around in circles on all fours, yelling, "We're gonna die! We're gonna die on Mars!" The face started disassembling and became something else. Zim jumped off the face and landed near me. A large seat and controls rose from the face. I finally stopped panicking and stared up in wonder at the unexpected change. Gur also flew off and landed in front of us. The land then started changing and some kind of structures burst through the ground. Zim, Gur, and I all climbed up to the seat and controls. Zim sat in the chair while I sat on top of the seat, and Gur sat on my shoulders. Zim pressed a button, and a holographic head appeared in front of us. I nearly fell out of the seat in surprise. Welcome, pilot, the head said. How you doing? Who are you? Zim asked. What is this? I am all that is left of my people. An interactive instruction manual with this incredible vessel you are now helming. Your people wear instruction manuals? Zim tried to figure out. No, I said. I think they just floating heads. No, the head said. No, huh? Zim looked down at the area around him. Vessel? This thing's a ship? My people worked themselves into extinction, converting our planet into a navigational space vessel, using similar technology tested and proven on another nearby planet. What other planet? That's not important right now, the Martian head told us. I told you something special about this place, I said to Zim. I knew there was more than meat sniffer. Huh, I guess you were right, Liz, but I was the one that opened the ship. I'm such an amazing invader. Zim looked at the Martian. But why would you do all this? Because it's cool. Mm-hmm. Gur agreed on my shoulders. Zim started to get the hang of the controls and everything. The planet hit some space debris and knocked Ger and me off of the seat and back onto the ground. Zim called the tall alphas and explained to them his plan to crash the Earthlings with the Mars ship. After he hung up, I climbed back onto the seat and asked Zim, "But what about my wolves? You gonna crush wolves along with humans?" You've got a point, Zim thought out loud. If only there was a way we could warn the wolves down on Earth. The Martian pointed with his head to a specific button on the control panel. "Actually, if you press that button and talk into that microphone, you can transmit any message for up to half a light year." "Really?" I asked the Martian excitedly. "Oh, that's perfect!" I practically sat on Zim's lap to get to the button and microphone. I used universal howl for "Everyone go underground, there's a giant spherical object coming towards Earth." "There's a howl just for that?" Zim tried to push my weight off of him, but I stayed put. "They're howl for everything these days." I rolled my eyes. "And this will be perfect because stupid, filthy humans not understand complex message." I pressed the button and started howling into the speaker. After I howled for a good 5 minutes, and was sure the message had reached the ears of every wolf on Earth, I handed the microphone over to Zim. "People of Earth," he cried into it, "prepare to taste the mighty foot of my planet." He started laughing, and I laughed and howled alongside him. My cat is distracting me right now, so excuse me. What do you want? Okay. The happy Zim makes me so happy. After a great while, Zim was starting to grow impatient. "This is taking too long," Zim shouted. "I told the tallest to bring the fleet tomorrow. At this rate, we won't be done with our destroying by then. There must be some boosters." Zim looked around the control panel and found what he was looking for. "Ah, hold on to something, Liz. You too, Ger." Ger only clung to himself while I clung to both Zim and the seat. Zim turned on the booster engines and the Mars ship took off at full speed. Zim laughed while I hung onto him. Ger was screaming on the ground and I screamed from the chair. The launching caused Ger to fly towards us and he landed on my head. Ger held onto my head and I held onto Zim's neck. Soon all three of us were laughing and even the Martian had joined in the laughter. Suddenly something flew past us and I could hear what sounded like Dib screaming. Zim and I stopped laughing and looked towards the object and sound. That sounded like... No, it couldn't be. Zim wondered out loud. "Zim," I said, "there only one person could be." Zim and I looked at each other, and Zim started to look angry and more determined. "The Earth Sting cannot stop me!" And he started laughing again. Ger took control of the controls while Zim was enjoying an Erkin sandwich. I was no longer clinging on for my life, but sitting with Ger on my lap and holding the bottom of the seat with my front paws. This ship was really only made for one driver, so having 3 up here was getting kind of tight. Eventually, Zim and Ger switched places so that Zim was driving and Ger was eating. I was on the back of the seat, watching us come closer to the Earth. I was hoping that the wolves would be okay, and that they could get underground in time. As we entered the Earth's atmosphere, the Mars ship started to blaze with fire. The 3 of us were howling and laughing maniacally while Ger was roasting a weenie in the fire. "Now," said Zim, "slowing to squishing speed." He pulled a gear back and the planet's ship slowed to a crawl. Mars went lower and lower until it just stopped. As far as we could tell, nothing was being squished, but we heard a man screaming. Only it wasn't screams of pain or death, only screams of fear. All of a sudden, we were knocked away from the earth by some large force. Zim steadied us, and another dust-colored planet flew past us. I heard Dib's voice shout to us, "Not while I'm around, Zim!" I looked up to see Dib sitting in the butt of Mercury. "Don't tell me you thought you'd actually win this." "Dib!" I shouted to him. "Get out of the way!" "You horrible, interfering Dib!" Zim yelled in frustration. "Taste the mighty doom of my moons!" The 2 moons were launched at Dib and broke apart on Mercury's surface. Dib flew around to the other side of Earth, so we couldn't see him. Zim and I looked around to try and find him. I stood on the back of the chair to get a better look, but couldn't see him. Then I looked towards the southeast of the Earth and saw the other planet racing towards us. Zim turned just in time to get us out of the way, and now we were in a chase. Dib, the predator, chased us, the prey, towards the sun. We caught the heat of the sun on our surface, but it didn't last long. "What are you doing?" I shouted in Zim's antennas. "You letting him chase you like some stupid old rabbit. You are wolf. You should chase him." Zim clenched his teeth and glared forward before turning the rust-colored planet around. He turned so we were upside down to Dib. "You shouldn't interfere with a superior force, Dib. You'd have been better off just staying on your planet and getting squished just like everybody else." "Well," Dib responded to Zim, "you shouldn't have bothered coming to Earth because I'll stop you at every turn. Liz, get away from that little green freak. Come back to my side. Come join me on the butt." "Get out of way, Dib!" I barked back at him, and Zim smiled. We flew away from him again and headed farther out of the solar system. The 2 planets danced around each other in an almost synchronized formation. We flew until we found ourselves flying through the dusty rings of Saturn. Dib was still behind us. We flew up and away from Saturn, and Zim looked back towards Dib. He suddenly grinned and pulled back the gears so that we came to an almost stop. I watched Dib as he crashed directly into our backside, and we blasted off again. I kept my eye on the malfunctioning Mercury to make sure its driver was still alive. But we flew so far away from him that I couldn't see Dib or the butt. Then he was back on track and chasing us again. "Gur!" Zim cried to Gur. "Go take care of the Earth boy." Gur saluted before flying off towards Dib. I watched the whole time as Gur just annoyed the living daylights out of Dib, pushing buttons and asking what everything did. Mercury started to spin out of control, and I smiled that he had been taken care of. As long as Dib didn't die, I was perfectly fine with Zim and I winning. Zim pondered. Maybe that little robot isn't such a bad evil minion after all. "You finally realized that?" I smiled down at Zim from my perch. "Took you long enough to see Gur potential." While we were flying back towards the Earth, I saw Mercury flying back on track. "Zim," I called over my shoulder, "we have company again." He looked back in horror at the approaching planet. Then he saw that we were flying right towards the asteroid belt. "Let's see if you have the piloting skills to maneuver through the asteroid belt, evil Dib thing." I looked back at Zim in shock. "What? Are you crazy?" "Silence!" Zim shouted at me. "It will work." Oh dear. I climbed down from the seat and curled up at the back of the face to lessen my chances of being directly hit with an asteroid. Unfortunately, Zim didn't realize until it was too late what a bad idea this was. Asteroids were crashing into the planet, but luckily none hit us directly. One finally hit the seat that Zim was on and knocked him to the ground. I looked up as he grabbed my head and led me to his cruiser. We jumped in the cruiser and took off through the asteroids, leaving the planet Mars to its unfortunate fate. We zoomed over Dib and his butt, who was yelling something about Zim going back to his home planet. "I've recorded this whole thing," he was saying. "Irrefutable proof of your existence. There's no way you can—" Dib looked over his shoulder to see that all his cameras were missing. "That little robot! He took my cameras!" We went back down to Earth, and Zim reported to the tall alphas that he had gotten rid of Mars as a warm-up to taking care of the humans. Chapter 17. Sweet and Sour. I have no reason to celebrate any sort of human holidays, and that includes Halloween. For one thing, Halloween promotes the eating of chocolate, which we all know is toxic to my species. Another thing is that I don't see the point in children dressing up in hand-me-down costumes that they never wear otherwise and demanding candy from strangers. Some children even dress up as human-wolf hybrids, as if to specifically mock me. How dare they think themselves worthy enough to wear the proud and powerful fur of a wolf? Anyway, today was October 31st, and everyone except Zim and me were dressed in their costumes for class. Dib was failing to show up, which sort of worried me, but not too much because that isn't unusual for him. He told me about this theory he has that paranormal activity is the result of our dimension crossing over with other dimensions, and that he wanted to test this theory. Too bad I don't understand what most of that means. Mary was up front, explaining why she was dressed as a fairy princess for Halloween. "I was a fairy princess once, too," Miss Bitters responded. "Everything was so nice and peaceful, until one day it all went horribly wrong. Ha! Halloween. Now it's just a shamelessly commercial ploy to turn children into candy-starved zombies." I nodded in agreement, while Zim started shaking in front of me with disgust and fear. He was looking around the classroom and freaking out at all the children in costumes. Then he saw Dib's empty desk and screamed so loud I almost howled in response. "What is it now, Zim?" Miss Bitters asked with great irritation. "The Dib!" Zim pointed at Dib's desk. "He's missing! They've taken him and drained him of his sweet, sweet blood candies." Zim ducked lower in his desk. "Aw," I smirked. "You actually worried about Dib?" "Silence!" Zim yelled at me. "One of us could be next." "Who's taken him?" Miss Bitters asked Zim. Zim was almost on top of his desk. "The candy zombies!" Miss Bitters started growling and was about to say something, but Zim panted and went on. "It's like you said," Zim went on. "The children try to end the hunger for sweetness in their rumbling undead bellies." "That's not what I said," Miss Bitters said as the classroom door opened to reveal the Dib. He shut the door and breathed heavily. I almost stood from my desk because I was so curious to what was going on. Zim started screaming again at the sight of Dib and hid completely behind his desk. "Sorry," Dib was saying between breaths. "I'm late. Horrible. Nightmare visions." "It's called life, Dib," Miss Bitters said without giving a hint of a damn. "Take your seat." Dib went to his desk and Zim watched him closely from just in front of me. "Dib seems more crazy than normal today," said the girl behind me. "Ah, it's starting!" Zim cried. "He's one of the zombies now! Look out for your blood!" "I don't know," the kid next to Zim said. "Zim's being kinda whack, yo." Zim got into the boy's face and hissed angrily at him before ducking back behind his desk. I reached over and started stroking the top of his head. "It okay, Zim," I said softly. "I protect you from zombies." On the other side of the room, Dib was shaking and freaking out while the others were trying to figure out if Zim was crazy or weird or something else. "It's happening again!" Dib cried, and I looked over to see that his arms were almost transparent. While everyone else was talking with each other, Zim and I were the only two to see Dib disappear entirely. I shot up from my desk. Dib! Zim threw himself against the wall and started making noises, and everyone's attention was on the two of us, while Dib was reappearing. Monsters! Dib screamed. Hideous monsters! What monsters? I whispered. Like wild moose or rabid grizzly? Miss Bitters? Yes, Zita? I think Dib's even crazier than normal today. Can we use one of our crazy cards to send him to the crazy house for boys? Each class only gets 3 crazy cards a month, Miss Bitters told her. Are you sure you want to use one? Dib suddenly fell out of his desk and started rolling around on the floor. Yeah. Miss Bitters took out a card and put it into a box, which then brought out a collar that she slammed on Dib's neck. Dib laid there with his neck blinking until the whitecoats broke down the door. I joined Zim in sneaking out of the classroom and hiding in the hallway as they took Dib away. Soon they'll all be after my delicious guts, Zim said. Not on my watch, Zim, I told him. I knew there were no candy zombies, but I also knew it was pointless to try and tell Zim that he's wrong. Plus I've been through this all 100 times with Dib. I defend you to death if I must. Come, Liz, he said to me. We must prepare the base's defenses against this Halloween madness. The hall monitor was suddenly next to us, investigating us. Zim freaked out and threw the trash can on his head before running off. I ran after him and out of the school, just in time to see Dib being thrown into the back of a padded vehicle. No! He was crying until he saw me. Liz, help me! The whitecoats looked at me. Don't bother helping. We're required to take this boy to the crazy house for boys, and we're trained to fight anyone who tries to stop us. I cocked my head. You trained fight people, maybe, but are you trained for fighting wolves? The whitecoats looked at each other. Are we trained for fighting off wolves? The other one took out a list and read it out loud. Let's see, crazy children, denying parents, squirrels, chickens, robots, peanut butter and jelly monsters, Venus flytraps, wiener dogs. Nope, no wolf training. Then unless you want leave work early today with your stomachs in my stomach, I suggest you hand over boy, I threatened. Seriously, Dib said up to the whitecoats. She's dangerous. You might want to listen to her. The whitecoats swiftly shut the back of the vehicle and began to drive off in a split second. I barked and chased the crazy van down the street. Dib was looking out the back window, screaming for me and hitting the glass with his fist. However, the van was too fast for me, and I eventually had to give up. I hated the familiarity of this situation. I then remembered Zim was at home, being all paranoid, and I needed to be there, or he'd think I'd become a zombie too. I ran back to the base and started howling at the house. Zim only opened the door a crack. Don't come any closer, zombie Liz! Zim, I approached the door. I'm not zombie. I promise I'd protect you. You're lying! Zim cried and tried to close the door, but I stopped it with my paw. How do I know you're telling the truth? Zim inquired in a low voice. Would zombie do this? I pushed the door open and jumped on top of Zim, licking his face. Zim was screaming, No! Help me, Gar! It's trying to eat my delicious flesh! Gar only cheered and jumped on top of Zim as well. I shoved the robot aside and tried to look Zim in the eye. Zim! Look my eye, Zim! Never! I'll never fall for your hypnosis, filthy monster! I turned Zim's head and looked him in the eye. Look at me, Zim. I not zombie, and I not let you become zombie. Fine. Zim pushed me off of him with heavy breaths. I'll trust you, but close the door. Well, that was easy, but the plot's gotta progress. We have to prepare the base for this horrible Earth holiday. After several hours of work, we had all the doors and windows boarded up. It was dark out by now, and we were ready to fight the terrible zombie children. Zim was finishing off one last board on the window when he looked through a gap to see the approaching children. They've mutated, Liz, he told me over his shoulder. They were disgusting before, but this hunger makes them even more. Zim looked out the window and gasped, They're coming! I pulled Zim away from the window and we hid behind the couch. The children were at the door yelling trick or treat. Zim screamed as the children's hands started breaking through the boarded-up windows. I ran over to the hands and started biting at the little fingers. The children would scream and retract from the windows. "Grr!" Zim shouted. "Activate the defenses!" Grr took out a remote and pushed a button. I watched as some lasers came out of the roof and started blasting the children. I heard a great blast and looked over to see Dib had broken in the window right next to Zim. "Dib!" I cried with relief and ran towards him. "Get away from my blood!" Zim shouted at Dib as Dib climbed down from the window. "Zim, I know how crazy this is gonna—" "Grr, stop him!" Zim commanded. "Defensive mode!" Grr only walked over to the window and leaped out. Zim had backed away almost to the television while I was right next to Dib by the couch. "I don't have time for this," Dib said. "The next jump may be the last one and I'll be stuck there forever. They're gonna do something to my head. Something evil." A child outside yelled trick or treat. "My head's not big!" Dib shouted out of nowhere. "I didn't say anything about your head," Zim said. I took Dib by the elbow. "Just calm down, Dib. What you need exactly?" "You two are the only ones that can help," Dib told me. "Help?" Zim responded. "You?" "My dad won't let me use his equipment and I need to reverse the effect." "Help? You?" Zim repeated. "You come to me, your greatest, most amazing enemy, your future slave master, and you ask for help?" "Zim, help him," I barked. "On with you." Zim started marching towards Dib, who backed into the wall. I released my hold on his arm and backed away from the confrontation. "I've had enough of your nonsense from your smelly mouth filled with corn." Dib and I were both confused. "I haven't been eating corn." "Liar!" Zim shouted and started trying to push Dib out the window, but Dib fought back. I wasn't sure what to do. Before my eyes, I saw Dib's arms fade away, and then both of them started fading, Zim and Dib. I started to reach forward for the two, but was too late. They had both vanished completely. I jumped to the spot where they were just standing and looked around. "Zim? Dib?" I started sniffing the ground and the wall. "Zim! Dib, where you go?" I heard a commotion outside and hopped out the window. I looked and saw Grr in his dog suit, attacking the children and stealing their candy. I looked on in horror at first, but then started smiling and chuckling. "Serves them right." I whispered to myself before approaching Grr as he scooped armfuls of candy into his mouth. "Candy!" he cried. "Let me help you, sugar pup." I grinned before pouncing on another child and tossing their candy towards my favorite robot dog. I continued this for about an hour, attacking kids and giving their candy to Grr. He kept demanding more and more, and I went and stole all the candy from all the houses in the neighborhood. Soon he was sitting on a giant pile of candy, stuffing himself and surrounded by injured children. The more he ate, the more Grr grew, until he was almost as big as a bear. I watched sadistically from the sidewalk as children groaned in pain and Grr continued stuffing himself. All of a sudden I heard a familiar scream. I looked around and then up towards the sky just in time to see Zim coming out of nowhere. He crashed straight through the candy pile and into the fence. "Zim!" I exclaimed and ran to his side. "There you are! What happened? Are you okay? Where Dib?" Zim only moaned in agony. Seconds later my Dib question was answered. A ball of guts flew at us and somehow became the Dib. "Dib!" We made it!" Dib picked me up and spun me around cheerfully. "I made it, Liz!" "As soon as my skeleton stops being broken, I'm going to destroy you, Dib," Zim said angrily. "Oh, you guys, I was worried about—" All of a sudden a purple beam in Dib's head started to stretch. I stepped back on all fours and started growling at the strange legs that were trying to climb out. A giant head popped out and spoke in a voice that reminded me of Miss Bitters. "At last! A new perfect world for me to— The monster looked around with revulsion at the children that were all partially dressed up and beaten half to death. Finally she saw the huge and grotesque figure of Grr as he continued to stuff himself with candy and sweets. The monster screamed and I growled louder as she sucked herself back into Dib's head. The purple beam grew thinner and thinner until it was simply disappeared. I stopped growling and cautiously approached the Dib. "Well," he said awkwardly while looking around at the other kids, "I'll see you guys at school. Bye, Liz." And he ran off. I looked back at Zim, who was still laying there in pain. I took Zim by the ankle, in my mouth, and dragged him inside. Chapter 18. Picture Box. Well, I'll be darned. Mysterious Mysteries is actually giving Dib a chance to argue his case against Zim. No way was I going to be excluded from this. I was at Dib's house when the camera crew came by. I was on the couch next to Gaz and Dib was somewhere else. "Who are you?" Gaz screamed at their entrance. "Get out of my house!" I sat up as Gaz threw a bowl of popcorn at the host's head. I knew who this was. I'd watched Mysterious Mysteries with Dib enough times. Dib flew in from the other room. "Oh, wow!" Dib cried when he saw them. "You're here! I knew one day you'd come! I knew it!" Dib and I were taken to the studio to talk about a certain video that Dib had made. I had been with Zim and Gur during the night in questioning, so I was a prime witness. I was backstage while Dib was on camera talking about Zim. Another staff member soon brought Zim to the studio. "Look at him," Dib was saying. "He's so green." "Help us clear up what happened that night." "I was monitoring some of the higher frequency radio waves when I picked up an alien distress signal. So I went out with Gaz. She's kind of my sidekick, when my regular sidekick isn't being a traitor to mankind." A reenactment showed Dib finding Zim and me by a tree, with Gur sitting in the tree playing with a mysterious floating light. The Liz actor was leaning against the tree and acting distressed. The Zim actor pulled out some type of ray gun and started shooting pink balls of light at Dib and Gaz. The Dib and Zim actors started fighting for the camera. "He tried to wrestle the video away from me, but I was too much for him," Dib told everyone. The Dib actor threw the Zim actor to the ground before turning to the Liz actor and helping her up. "Oh, Dib," she said to him. "That was so brave of you. Thank you so much for rescuing me." I scoffed at the footage. "Rescue? Me?" I said to Zim. "That little cockroach." "Aliens," said the host to Dib. "That's quite a claim. Are you prepared to defend it?" "I think my video speaks for itself," Dib said calmly. Zim was directed to go on stage and sit beside Dib. "This young man denies your accusation." "What's he doing here?" Dib shouted. "He's the alien." "I came to put a stop to all your alien talk," Zim told him. "When will the lies end?" "Well, Zim, I guess my first question is, are you an alien?" "Lies! The filthy earth boy lies!" Zim cried and pointed at Dib. No. "Well, what about the video?" A new reenactment started up. This time Zim and Gur were both in the tree with a flashlight while I was on the ground. My front paws were on the trunk of the tree and I was cheerfully watching the two. I was out playing like any normal Earth larvae when he came looking for trouble. The Zim actor climbed down from the tree and started playing with the Liz actor when Dib and Gaz actors showed up. Actor Dib was basically being a bully to Actor Zim, and Actor Liz was acting scared of Dib. Actor Dib pushed Actor Zim as well as Actor Liz aside before shaking Gur out of the tree. Actor Zim and Actor Liz both started crying on the ground. Actor Dib kicked Actor Zim in the head and started dragging Actor Liz away by the hair. The video ended and I smiled at how amusing it was. "That didn't happen," Dib shouted. "I would never treat Liz like that. She's my best friend." "He lies!" Zim responded angrily. "What about that glowing thing?" Dib asked. "Look at it. That is no human glow." "What's a human glow?" "We asked an expert." Professor Membrane came on the screen while looking at a screenshot of the light. "Possibly a weather balloon or swamp gas." "Swamp gas?" Dib said. "He's crazy," Zim said. "Ask anyone in our class." The screen went to an interview of a bunch of kids from our class, and they all agreed that Dib's not all there. Well, Dib, I guess the question for you is, are you crazy? Of course they say I'm crazy, Dib defended. That's what they always say about visionary. Speaking of visionary, the host said, let's bring out our first witness of the incident, Elizabeth. I came out and sat on the floor between Zim and Dib. Liz here is said to be a mutual friend between Dib and Zim. She was a feral child for the first half of her life, so her English isn't the most pristine. However, she may just hold the truth about what happened that night. The host told the camera. Now, Liz, in your own words, will you please tell us what you remember happening that night? I nodded and a new reenactment started. This time Gur was in the tree with a flashlight, and Zim and I were on the ground. Actor Liz was on her back while Actor Zim was scratching her belly. I out playing with friend Zim, I told everyone. Zim nice to me. He call me good wolf. Who's a good little wolf? Said Actor Zim to Actor Liz. Who's a good wolf? You are! You are! Then other friend Dib and Gaz come with camera. Actor Dib and Gaz came out of the bushes, and Actor Zim stopped scratching Actor Liz. Look, Gaz, he is an alien. You're my witness. I have him on tape. I have you on tape witnessing it. Liz, get away from him. Actor Liz jumped up and struggled to walk on all fours. Actor Zim and Dib started fighting each other for the camera. They rolled around on the ground while Actor Liz was trying to get them to stop. Sometimes Dib was overpowering Zim, sometimes Zim was overpowering Dib. In the end, Dib kept the camera, and then approached Actor Liz. He grabbed Actor Liz by the collar and started dragging her away from the scene. Come on, Liz, stay away from that little monster, Actor Dib said to the sad Actor Liz. Me just want Zim and Dib stop fighting, I said with big eyes when the video ended. But the question is, Liz, said the host leaning forward, is Zim an alien, or is Dib just crazy? I looked up at Dib, who held plea in his eyes. I looked up at Zim, who smiled with confidence. Truth is, me not know either way. Zim and Dib my two best friend, and I not want see one dissected or other go crazy house. This is insane, shouted Dib. Just talk to my sister, she saw the whole thing. Gaz was brought out and sat next to Zim. Gaz, after what you saw, do you believe that your brother got proof of intelligent extraterrestrial life? Intelligent? No, Gaz said with boredom. My stupid brother did drag me out to look for stupid Zim. He didn't make that part up. Another reenactment began, and it basically showed everyone but Gaz as dim-witted. It looks like we'll never know what really happened that night, said the host to the camera. I'd like to thank you all for watching what will most certainly be the final episode of Mysterious Mysteries. Someone came over and whispered a few things to the host. It seems we have a surprise witness who is there and claims to know the truth. Gur came out on stage and sat next to Gaz. But he works for the alien, exclaimed Dib. Restrain him. Dib was restrained. Now, what can you tell us about Dib? He's so mean to my master, Gur was telling them. He's not nice to Zim. I seen it. Dib is bad. And what about the night in question? Another reenactment began, and Gur claimed to be a woman who was hiding in the bushes during the event. According to Gur, a giant squirrel showed up before Dib. When Dib saw the giant squirrel, he freaked out and the squirrel ate Dib's head. Then the squirrel went back to its home planet to fight bad guys. I bowed my head in embarrassment. What does that have to do with anything? The host asked Gur. Me and the squirrel are friends, Gur said innocently. After that, the five of us all looked at each other. Well, the only conclusion I can come to is that Dib is crazy. The host turned to Gur. This one here? Definitely crazy. I feel bad for the ugly green kid, but there's a decent chance he's crazy too. But not an alien, Zim had to confirm. Nope. Okay. Just crazy. Zim jumped out of his seat and squealed with delight before dragging Gur off stage. I sat for a moment and looked up at Dib in his straitjacket. You not crazy, Dib. You just not nice to Zim. and then I dogged after Zim. Zim and I walked back to his base together. "That went well," Zim said down to me while walking. "Another victory for Zim." "Zim always have victory." I smiled up at him. "Yes." He narrowed his eyes with a grin. "Victory will never escape the hands of the greatest invader to ever live." "I never let victory escape Zim," I agreed. Chapter 19. Silence. See if you can figure out why it's called that. I had to leave again. I couldn't stand to be in civilization for another moment. It was the 4th time I'd ever tried to leave since I was rescued 5-ish years ago. Of course, I'm always found and always returned to society. Even if I couldn't return to the old pack, I just had to get out of this complicated lifestyle. So one morning, instead of walking to school with the green child like I always do, I got up a few hours early and headed out the door. My fosters were asleep on the couch with the TV on. I slipped out the door while the sun was still below the horizon, and I looked down the street at the little green house. Nothing about it seemed out of the ordinary. Its inhabitants and no other creature knew that I was taking off. Perhaps one day I would return for the owner of that little house, but right now I couldn't bear to stay, not even for him. I turned and trotted until I was in front of the other house that I was so familiar with. If I leave, I couldn't protect the inhabitants of this house, and one of them wouldn't be able to protect the earth. The human boy would have to take care of himself. I was sure he could do it long enough. The human was smart, and he had the resources to protect himself and the earth. I took my sweet time leaving the city and discreetly making my way to the hills and forests to the north. It took me until sunset before I finally sniffed out the marked territory of what was once my pack. By now, none of the wolves in the pack would have been old enough to truly remember me when I was one of them. I knew that, and the fact that my aroma has changed so much would make it difficult for the pack to re-welcome my presence. Using both my nose and my ears, I tracked the pack's exact location. At last I saw them in the distance. I remained upwind so that my human-like odor wouldn't spook them. I recognized the alpha as one of the pups from the litter that was born only a week before my departure. I could see and smell a few others from that particular litter, but didn't recognize anybody else. I knew this would be the situation I'd find myself in if I tried to return. I had to let them know of my location, but also that I was one of them and meant no harm. I craned my neck and started howling the location howl I remember from the pack. This howl would identify my location and that I was part of the pack instead of an outsider. The wolves stopped playing about, and all looked in my direction. The alpha slowly approached me with some betas following. I crouched so that I was lower and in a more submissive position to the leader. The alpha finally stopped, a couple of paws away from me. I looked up at him, and he lowered his head and began sniffing my hair and neck. I remained perfectly still as the black leathery nose tickled my shoulders and arms. It almost seemed he was ready to accept the scent of me when it all went wrong. The nose trailed down until it found itself hovering over the communication device that was given to me by another species. The alpha froze. His eyes were wide as they stared at me. He took another long, strong whiff of the device and jerked away from me. I bent my legs even closer to the ground as the superior wolf backed away in fear. I've never known an alpha to show fear like this, not in the presence of a bear or a moose or even a human with a gun. The alpha made a few whimpering noises towards the betas behind him and then turned away from me. running as fast as he could. The betas ran as well, and soon the whole pack was trying to get away from me. The wolves were gone, and I was left alone beneath this evergreen tree. If this was how the wolves reacted to this device, how would they react to the actual thing, the one that gave it to me? I closed my eyes and lowered my head until my breaths bounced back at me from the ground. The wolves would never accept us as their leaders. There's no way that the green men and the wolves would ever be able to come together. How could I think it was possible for even me to be both? As long as I had connections to one, I couldn't belong to the other. I wrapped my teeth around the device on my wrist and held my grip for a moment. Choosing this would mean I've abandoned him for good, that I've chosen to be a wolf, and only a wolf. With my teeth holding on tight, I ripped the device from my arm. I turned and started digging the dirt away from beneath the tree. Once I had a deep enough hole, I dropped the little device in the hole and stared down at it. It was my gift from him, even if he didn't intend it to be a gift. With a single paw, I shoved the dirt back on top of the device until it was out of sight. I placed my paw on the spot and mentally tried to break my connection to the other end of this object. It felt difficult, almost impossible. It was like trying to cut barbed wire with your tongue. It was painful, and it broke my heart. However, I eventually had to turn away from the tree and the object buried under it. The next sunrise, I had found the pack again. This time I came bearing a gift, a rabbit I had taken all night to catch. While low to the ground, I crawled slowly towards the other wolves. They all soon noticed my presence and lowered their ears and tails. Some of them started to back away slowly, but I started to whimper and whine through the rabbit in my mouth, signaling that I was peaceful. The others whimpered back, showing that they didn't want to exchange conflict. I'd seen wolves never back down from a fight. They fight to the death to protect their territory and their pack. Why were they so afraid of the green people? Did they know something that I didn't? Something that even that one human didn't know? I went to the halfway point between me and the wolves and dropped the rabbit on the ground. I then backed away and waited for them to accept my offering. A scout trotted forward and started sniffing the carcass. She found nothing off about it and barked this information back to the alpha. The alpha came forward and sniffed the rabbit for himself while eyeing me. Finally, he grabbed the rabbit in his teeth while still watching me carefully. He let out a couple of low growls to warn me that I wasn't accepted yet. I had access to the territory and the food within, but I wasn't allowed a ranking or a place in the pack. For the next couple of suns or days, I was able to tail the back of the pack, only allowed the last scraps during feeding, and never allowed to sleep close to the others. This made sleeping long and cold. I had ditched my human clothes when I first reached the territory. It was to eliminate the smell of human from my body and to give myself more flexibility. This was better than not being accepted at all, and I was grateful to be near my own kind once again. However, I often began to wonder about my companions I had in civilization. Had they even noticed I was gone? Did they wonder where I went? What were they doing at the moment? No doubt one was playing her video games. Another was probably eating a waffle or a taco while watching an angry monkey. The other two were probably fighting as usual. It didn't matter. That wasn't my life anymore. I was a wolf, and I was always meant to be a wolf. Just because I have skin like a human doesn't make me so. It was late in the night, and most of the wolves were asleep. I was only able to sleep several trees away from the others, and had to be downwind of them at all times so they could keep a nose and ear on me. I shut my eyes and returned my mind to how it worked just 5 years ago, back when there was nothing but feelings, nothing but the senses and my reactions to them. There were no words, no labels for anything. I thought about my wolf mother, the way she protected me and the way she taught me to be like her. She was patient with me. Her sun-colored eyes held all the love I ever needed. I thought of her silver fur that would keep me warm during these cold nights. I would never see her again. I could never see her again. I remember the last time I saw her, the fear in her eyes as she tried to protect me. I didn't notice the hot, salty water spilling from my eyes and soaking into the ground beneath my face. It had been reoccurring dreams of her that convinced me to come back. I knew, of course, that she wouldn't be here to greet me, but I just had to come home to where she once was. I fell into a peaceful sleep that only lasted a short while. A bright light suddenly shined down directly on me. I shot my head up to look at the source, but couldn't see beyond the blinding light. The wolves around me were barking and howling at whatever was hovering over me. I placed my paw in front of my face to shield my eyes from the light. I looked past the light to see a familiar spacecraft. I heard 3 familiar voices all shouting down at me, but couldn't truly understand them. My mind was still in a state that couldn't process that kind of language. The bright light was replaced with a tractor beam that pulled me towards the craft. I was brought inside the cruiser, and was sat down by 2 of the creatures inside. One of the creatures was the driver of the cruiser, and he was looking at me with large magenta eyes. His antennas were perked up in curiosity and worry, just as a wolf's ears might have been. Another creature removed his black trench coat and wrapped it around my shaking, naked body. The third creature was hugging me with his small robotic arms and crying tears of joy. They had worked together to find me. They never worked together, not so voluntarily like this. Did they really care that much about me? They were all still shouting things at me, but I was blocking them out. I was just too shocked. I was torn between being enraged with them and being relieved to see them again. How can I be both? No, how can I be all 3? Not a wolf, not a human, not a green person. I just had connections to each. Human blood flows through my veins while wolf instinct flows through my mind and muscles, and a green person has flown into my heart and refuses to escape. That night, they took me to the greenhouse, where all 3 stayed and kept an eye on me while I warmed up on the couch. The human seemed so concerned with getting me clothes. He went back to the foster house and got a new set of warm clothes for me. He also made the green one and even the robot turn away as I dressed in silence. The robot seemed so concerned with trying to feed me. He kept shoving pizza and bacon in my face. The green one just kept watching me as I ate and rested. I still hadn't said a word since they found me. Now he seemed to be stuck in the same silence. Chapter 20. Earn Your Yearn. Apparently they had tracked me by locating the communicator and searching the area around that. I'm talking again, but only when someone speaks to me first. Back to sleeping at the foster parents' house. Thankfully, they didn't call my therapist or I would never hear the end of it. I'm grateful that they're just too lazy to care about anything like that. Zim and Dib told me about this little adventure that went on while I was gone that involved Professor Membrane and a robot and some woman named Peg or something. Since my return, Zim and Dib have both become somewhat overprotective of me. Zim calls me first thing every morning to make sure that I'm still here. Dib gets all worried if I'm even a few seconds late to class, or he doesn't know where I am at any given moment. This morning, my wrist started vibrating the same as it always does, and I hit a button without opening my eyes. "Liz!" a voice shouted. "That Hollister is sending me to train on a military training planet, so I will be gone for a few days. If I pass my training, they will send me a series of weapons that will assist us in destroying the humans. I need you to cover for me at school. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. I nodded with my eyes still closed. I haven't been that excited about world domination with Zim since what happened with the pack. I know it will be difficult for you to live without Zim for a while, Liz, Zim was saying in that egotistical way of his. I opened one eye and looked down at him as he spoke. Believe me, it will be over before you know it, and I will have returned to your pathetic life soon enough. I smiled slightly and shook my head. Stay safe, Alpha. You need not worry about Zim. I am the greatest soldier as well as the greatest invader to ever live. Zim gestured dramatically. Yes, Alpha. I can never stop smiling while talking with Zim. An hour later, I entered the class and trotted up to Miss Bitters, who was sitting at her desk, glaring at Dib, who looked guilty about something. She heard me at her side and looked at me with irritation. What is it, Liz? Zim out town couple day, I said up to the old woman. It wasn't a lie, of course. I just didn't say how far out of town. Ha, Miss Bitters said. Too bad it isn't Dib that's gonna be gone. She glared bullets at Dib, who lowered his head in guilt and embarrassment. I must have just missed another one of Dib's little episodes. Later at lunch, I had no choice but to sit with Dib and Gaz. Let me guess, Dib said with suspicion as we took our seats. Zim's not really out of town, is he? Yes, he is, I told Dib. Off-planet, still out town. I knew it, Dib said with a fist. Well, come on, Liz, where did he go? Did he finally give up and go back to his home planet? No, I responded through my slimy burger. He be back. Then where is he? Dib continued to inquire. He not say planet name. I shrugged. Another planet. Dib pondered the idea. Did he say why he was going? Yes, I said and continued chewing. Really? Dib was practically laying across the table with excitement. Tell me, what was the purpose? Me not tell. I shook my head at Dib. What? Why not? Secret. Sometimes I really hate you, you know that, Liz? Dib sat back and crossed his arms. Sometimes. I repeated the word with a smirk. Dib rolled his eyes. Whatever. I assume you're coming over tonight? Me not have anything better to do, I answered, glad the subject was changed from this interrogation. Will you two shut up already? I'm trying to play a game, Gaz growled. With that, we had no choice but to end the conversation. A couple hours later, the three of us were back at the membrane house. Dib and I were on the couch, waiting for Mysterious Mystery to come on, and Gaz was in another room. Dib was on the far left of the couch with his pen and notepad handy, ready to take notes on whatever the show had to offer tonight. I was on the far right of the couch, with my back paws on the middle cushion and my head resting on my front paw. Soon enough, the show began and the host was on screen. Tonight on Mysterious Mysteries. Is this hovering walnut something supernatural, or can it be explained by science? Whoa! Dib gasped, leaning forward. I bet there's something supernatural about that walnut. No walnut should be hovering like that. We interrupt this program to bring you breaking news. Mysterious Mysteries was suddenly replaced by a wide-eyed woman from the news. Aw, man, Dib gestured towards the television with disappointment. The show is just getting good. 19 people have been reported dead after a mass shooting at a random mall in a random city somewhere. The reporter went on, but Dib took the remote and turned the volume down to almost mute. What is wrong with people these days? He was saying. All you see is people killing each other when there's a greater threat in the form of an alien. People should be putting their focus on him, not each other. What do you think, Liz? Dib looked at me from the other end of the couch. I lifted my head from my paw and looked in Dib's direction, but not directly at him. The world would be so much nicer if people only used guns on themselves. Wow, Liz, Dib responded with wide eyes. That's real profound, and not even a hint of broken English. I read words somewhere, I explained. Really? Where? Dib furrowed his brow. Me not remember. I shook my head. A few days later, I was seriously starting to miss Zim. Dib just kept trying to find out from me where Zim went and for what reason. I was beginning to understand Gaz's irritation towards him. By the last full day without Zim, I was avoiding Dib's interrogations by sitting with Gaz when I was at their house and spending less time at their house altogether. I was mostly running around the city hunting for rats and hanging out with the stray dogs. If not that, I was spending my time with Gur. Today I was with Gur. We were in Zim's house, surrounded by scraps of what was once lots of raw meat. The television was on to some show about a boy with a large nose, a creepy blonde girl that reminded me of Gaz, and their Jamaican skeleton friend. I wouldn't have been paying attention, but the voice of the boy with the big nose was so familiar. I couldn't put my paw on it, but I swear I heard that voice before. I don't know where. But where? About an hour after the sun fell below the horizon, I heard the roof above open up and the cruiser land inside. "Master's home!" Gur cried with delight. Zim soon descended the elevator into the living room, where I hopped out off of the couch and trotted towards him with a smile on my face and my tailbone shaking. "Look at this place!" Zim exclaimed upon seeing the meaty mess. "It's like a pack of liberal zasters decided to feast here. Gur, clean up this mess." "Yes, my lord." Gur saluted and then started playing in the meat juice on the ground. "Good have Zim back." I grinned up at the Yearn. "How'd training go?" "Pfft, easy as taking a toy from a smeat." Zim took a seat on the couch with a relaxing sigh. "I assume the Earthlings suspected nothing of my absence?" "I told Bitters you out of town." I came over and joined him on the couch, curled up with my head just touching his leg and my eyes watching Gur. Did keep asking questions, though. "Ha! Dibstink knows nothing of the horrible, doomy things that await him and his planet in the future." I rolled my eyes with a smile. "He's smart." "For a human, but no creature is nearly as intelligent as Zim." "Zim's smartest in the universe," I added to his huge ego, which always makes Zim smile, and we all know how much I love seeing that. Zim had his arms in the air, and they fell with one hand landing on my head. "That's why you're my favorite Earthling, Liz. You see my amazingness so much more clearly than any other stink beast." My heart sped, and I closed my eyes to enjoy this moment of having Zim back. I wrapped my arms around Zim's torso and held him. "Hey, what are you doing?" Zim tried to push me away. "I just missed Zim so much." My lavender eyes looked up at his large magentas. He stared down at me, and then his face relaxed and he smiled. "And Zim missed you, Liz." He patted my head gently. "Yay!" A bloody Gur suddenly jumped on us. The blood that came into contact with Zim started to sizzle on his skin and he freaked out, leaving the room. With my paw, I grabbed the robot by his antenna and lifted him from the couch. "Gur, you such mess." I shook my head. "Let me clean you up." Gur started clapping and I started licking the blood from him like my mother would lick messes from me. When he was all clean, I set him back down and he just ran around in circles. I went down to the lab to check on Zim to see him cleaning himself with some Yearn soap. "Zim okay?" I asked him. "I'm fine," he shouted back at me. "Zim is always fine." I trotted towards him and started licking the simmering skin, and Zim relaxed. What would I do without Liz's amazing tongue to heal me from the filthy planet's horrible stuff? Chapter 21. Point It Out. Tonight was a Dib night for me, so I walked home with him and Gaz. Dib ordered some pizza for dinner. Not that I had any, of course. I just went rat hunting like I usually do. The membranes don't really care if I bring dead animals in the house, as much so long as I clean up whatever mess I make and don't get anything in the professor's science equipment. Zim has the same rules. I ate on the floor under the table while the other two enjoyed their pizza above me. "Gaz," Dib was asking, "do you think I should try a different style for my hair? I mean, I've had the same pointy cowlick thing for 11 years now." "I think you should try a different style of communicating, like maybe silence," Gaz said with all her charm. "I'm serious." Dib hardly took his sister's threats and comments so seriously. I guess that's how he got such tough skin when it comes to dealing with everyone calling him crazy. "What do you think, Liz?" He looked under the table at me. I raised my head from my rat meal and looked up Dib. Dib hair unique. Keep same. You're right, Liz. Dib smiled down at me and rubbed my head. That's why you're my best friend. I smiled as he scratched my head and returned to eating. After dinner, Dib and I went outside to play fetch with a ball, while Gaz stayed inside to game. I've been thinking a lot lately, Liz, Dib said with his eyes somewhat down. You spend an awful lot of time at our house. Way more than your foster parents' house. Uh-huh, I nodded as I dropped the small ball at his feet. Dib picked up the ball and bounced it between his two hands as he spoke. Well, you're like a family dog here, Liz. Heck, you're more than that. He threw the ball and I ran after it. You're really one of the family, and I was wondering if you maybe wanted to move in with us. I had picked up the ball in my mouth again, and was now staring at Dib. I held the ball in my teeth while watching him wait for me to answer. His head was tilted down, but his eyes watched me. He rubbed one arm with his other hand, nervously. I lowered my head and dropped the ball at my paws before taking a step towards Dib. Why? I finally said in a near whisper. Why? Dib repeated to confirm that's what I said. Well, since you last ran away, I've been worrying about you, Liz. When I don't know where you are or anything, I have to hope that you're not trying to leave again. I really don't want to lose you like that again. He scratched the back of his head and laughed nervously. I guess I just really want to make sure that you're always safe. I took a few steps closer to him. Where would I sleep? Dib raised his head excitedly and started talking quickly as if me asking this was me saying yes. Oh, wherever you want, Liz. You could sleep in Gaz's room at the foot of her bed, or Dad's room at the foot of his bed, or at the foot of my bed. He grinned bashfully after saying that. I silently raised an eyebrow and stared at him some more. When I said nothing, he shrugged and looked down. Or, somewhere else if you like, he mumbled. I still said nothing as I was thinking about what this would all mean. This would truly make me part of the Membrane family. Would I finally be able to have a real last name instead of just Liz Wolfe? Liz Membrane. Elizabeth Membrane. It doesn't sound too terrible. I'd definitely be able to protect them better if I was sleeping in their house instead of so far away. But then I'd be farther away from Zim. I'd still spend many evenings at his house, but then I'd have to leave earlier for the longer walk home. I wouldn't be surprised if Dib would try to forbid me from going to see Zim at his house altogether. He was so protective of me, and I was so protective of him. Look, Dib thrust his hands forward when I still didn't answer. I've seen your foster parents. They don't care about you at all. I know our family may not be perfect, but we do care about you. It's not just me, but Gaz likes you too, better than most people, and that's saying something. Remember when you broke your leg? My dad dropped everything he was doing to find you a cure. I don't even know if he'd do something like that for me, his own son. But for you, he didn't hesitate. Dib shrunk the space between us and sat on his legs so that he was at my level. Don't you see? You're one of us, Liz. You belong in this family. You want me to live with you? I finally asked. That's right, Liz. Dib nodded quietly. I heard you talked with Gaz about it, and she said she don't care. I asked Dad, and he thinks it's a good idea. What do you say? I think about, I said after a brief pause. Yeah, of course, Dib almost shouted. Take all the time you need. I know it's a big decision and a big change. But hey, it can't be that big of a stretch as going from living with wolves to living with people. That's true, I agreed. I turned back and nudged the ball towards Dib. Let's get back to the game. Yeah, okay. Dib chuckled and picked up the ball. About a half hour later, we went back inside to get ready for the next installment of Mysterious Mysteries. Gaz was on the couch and Dib sat on the other end of the couch. I curled up on the middle cushion as usual with my head next to Dib's leg. Did you ask her yet? Gaz asked Dib. Yeah, she says she's gonna think about it, Dib answered her. What's there to think about? Gaz looked down at me. Who would actually want to live here with my stupid brother? Gaz! Dib shot a look at his sister. You're not helping. She glared back at her brother and continued with her game. I smiled up at Dib and he smiled back down at me, before starting to pet my back just the way I liked. Mysterious Mysteries came on and it was the same old story about some Bigfoot sighting somewhere. After the show ended and Dib finished up explaining his theories to me, I decided it was time to walk home. Gaz and Dib went to get ready for bed and I headed outside and started down the street. I then heard and felt thunderous footsteps approaching. I looked towards the source to see a hovering Zim out of his disguise. There were some tree branches surrounding him and a large cord attached to what looked like nothing. Gur was trailing behind in his dog outfit. "Prepare yourself for the end, Dib!" Zim shouted at the house behind me. Dib ran out of the house and stopped next to me to see Zim. "I've put up with you long enough, Dib," Zim continued. "Now, fight an enemy you cannot see!" Dib pointed at Zim. "You're right there." "What?" Zim tried to move to the side. "There!" I pointed up at him. "Your mighty Irken cloaking device cloaks the robot, but not you." Dib explained what Zim clearly couldn't see. "Lies!" Zim shouted. "Now behold the Doom Cannon!" "Where?" I asked. "Yeah, it's invisible," Dib said. "But you can see me?" Zim asked us. "That's what I said," Dib confirmed and I nodded. "Oh, that's stupid," Zim said to himself. "Really stupid," Dib responded. "You dare agree with me?" Zim shouted accusingly. "Prepare to meet your horrible doom!" "No, no, no!" I shouted up to Zim as he started pressing invisible buttons. I stood on 2 feet and ran toward Zim, trying to stop him from whatever he was trying to do. However, I didn't really have to do anything. "Warning! Power draw critical!" the machine warned and started shorting out. The entire city then blacked out and the cloaking device turned off to reveal the large robot thing. "Chicken!" Gur pointed and giggled. "I'm gonna eat you!" I backed away from the machine as Dib pulled out a camera to start snapping pictures. I tried to snatch the camera away from Dib, but he kept it well out of my reach. I then noticed the lens cap was on and quickly gave up the fight. "Crop Circles magazine's gonna put me on the front cover," Dib was saying excitedly. "Somebody take one with me standing next to it." Since I clearly wasn't going to help Dib expose Zim, plus I didn't really know how to use a camera, Dib handed the camera to Gur and began posing in front of the machine. "Aw," Gur mused, "you look so cute." I shook my head at the situation. "No, Gur, no!" Zim shouted from inside the robot. "Security compromised! Must self-destruct!" Zim launched himself out the back of the machine, which started counting down from 5. Dib and I ducked behind Gur, with Dib holding his precious camera. The robot blew up and debris was flying everywhere. I rose when the explosion ended to see Zim take the camera from Dib. "Victory!" Zim cried while holding the camera above his head. "What do you mean, victory?" Dib stood up and asked Zim. "Your robot exploded and you didn't destroy me." "It was a trick, yes," Zim responded. My plan was to steal this camera from you so that you couldn't show these pictures. Ha!" Dib tackled Zim and started wrestling him for the camera. Since I knew the camera was useless with the cap on, I had no reason to take sides here, so I just watched these boys wrestle about like pups. Zim bounced the camera around in his hands and Dib finally grabbed it. "Victory for Earth!" he shouted with the camera in the air. "Dib!" I shouted to him from beside Gur. "Yes, Liz?" Dib grinned back at me. "Camera cap's still on, you know." Dib looked at the camera. "It is not, Ah!" Zim ran a few feet down the block as I laughed. "Victory! Victory for Zim!" A giant piece of the robot then landed on top of Zim. I ran towards the spot and started digging under the giant robot part. "I'm going back to bed," I heard Dib say to himself behind me. I continued digging, but it seemed to be taking too long. "Gur!" I cried to the robot dog over my shoulder. "Come help Master out!" Gur ran over, and together we eventually got Zim out. "I am Zim!" he screamed as he stood on his feet. "Come," I nudged Zim. I walked Zim home. The three of us started walking back to our neighborhood. "Stupid, unsuspecting dib human," Zim was saying. "Zim," I interrupted, "I have to tell you something." "What is it, Liz?" Zim said down to me. "Can't you see I'm trying to convince myself that this was a victory for Zim?" "It about Dib," I told the Urkin. He asked me move in with him." Zim stopped in his tracks and his eyes grew to the biggest I'd ever seen them. "What? How dare he? That little corn-eating human!" Zim was punching at the air in a rage and stomping the ground when he finally turned to me. "You told him no, didn't you?" "I told him I think about it," I said to Zim. "What is there to think about?" Zim shouted to the sky. "He's a horrible little human that does horrible little human things. Why, if you lived with the Dib, you would be farther away from Zim." "I know," I bowed my head. I'll tell him no." "Good," Zim growled. "That filthy little human will pay if he thinks he can get you all to himself." "What's Zim mean?" I tilted my head. Zim's eyes went wide for a second. "Nothing. You didn't hear anything." Zim pointed at me. "Right," I responded, and we continued walking. Chapter 22. Burn It. A couple days after the whole Megadoomer thing, we were all sitting in class. I still haven't officially told Dib that I won't be moving in with him, but I've been dropping hints that I'm thinking of not doing it. Other than that, there's not much to report on. Dib was up in front of the class giving some sort of speech about this Galileo guy that was called crazy and turned out to be right about the Earth. "But nobody believed Galileo. They even put him in jail," Dib was saying with passion. "Now if all these people who just called him crazy were brought back and shown just how wrong they really were, they'd be sorry. Oh, they'd be Time's up, Dib." Bitters interrupted. "Any questions?" Zita raised her hand behind me. "You're crazy." "Excellent, Zita," Bitters commented. "You get an A." Zim was snickering in front of me and Dib looked at Miss Bitters with disappointment. But that wasn't a question. I put my paw in the air. "I have a real question. Why not Galileo not just go live with wolves? He would have been much happier, and they not call him crazy." "Because that's a whole other kind of crazy," said Zita, and the other students laughed except for Dib and Zim. Dib went to his seat and glared at Zim, who glared back. Melvin then appeared in the doorway, scratching his head. He skipped cheerfully to the front of the class. "Sorry I'm late. My head's itchy." He giggled and scratched. Okay, every time I read this chapter, I get a really, itchy head. But that never happens when I watch the episode. Only when I read this chapter, I get really itchy scalp. I don't know why that is. What do you think that is, guys? Let me know. Seconds later, a swarm of something erupted from Melvin's head and towered over the class. Miss Bitters gasped. "Lice!" The cloud of bugs hovered over the class before separating and filling the heads of children. The top of my head became painfully itchy, and I proceeded to scratch at my hair with my claws. The scratching did little good, and I soon was removing my shoes and scratching with my back paws. None of it was helping. If I could have reached, I would have been biting at the top of my head like I do with a mosquito or tick bite. I rubbed my scalp against the ground, but to no avail. Other children were slamming their heads into the wall and into each other. I took a peek at Zim to see that he didn't seem to be affected by the vermin. Dib was on the other side of the room, scratching like everyone else. The children started piling out of the classroom, and soon the whole school was infected with the lice. Miss Bitters pressed a button on her desk, and seconds later 3 figures appeared in the front corner of the room. One of the men wielded some sort of device and then looked at the woman in the middle. "Level 1 infestation, ma'am." "A level 1? She confirmed. "I am Countess von Firmenstrasse. Yeah, I'm just gonna call her Karen. But I want you to know, I came up with that way before Karen became such a big meme." "The delouser. For your own good, you will cooperate. You have lice. And until your condition changes, you will all be detained here indefinitely." Dib was standing in front of the German woman, and I was scratching away with my foot next to Zim's desk. "You can't really make us stay here?" Dib tried to ask. Wow, this chapter really did age really, really well. "You dare question me?" Karen pointed accusingly. "Question my methods? You who stands to benefit the most from my work? You disgust me." "What a nice lady," said Miss Bitters. "All I said was silence." Karen silenced Dib. "Let the delousing begin." The whole school was put under quarantine and gathered in the gymnasium. We were separated into groups based on our lice severity. Zim and Miss Bitters were the only two that didn't have any lice, while I was put into the extreme group with Dib and Gaz. "These two have no lice on them at all." Karen gestured to Zim and Bitters on stage. Zim got up from his chair and walked up to the podium with a grin. I'd just like to say that if I were a member of an alien race, which I'm not," he looked around to make sure people were buying it, and I rolled my eyes as I scratched with my back paw. "I'd have to take this opportunity to say, filthy earth creatures! It is clear who the superior species is, isn't it? Isn't it? You stink!" Dib threw a ball of paper at Zim's head, and one of Karen's minions took him back to his seat. "The two clean ones will be taken to a special area for immunity research." "This is insane," Dib said next to me. "Isn't this a bit much for an outbreak of lice?" Yeah, Dib clearly didn't live through 2020. "The rest of you will all see my assistants," Karen told us. "Pack go about business covered in fleas and ticks," I told Dib. "This lice nothing." Dib and I were handcuffed together and guided down a hallway. We looked in each of the classrooms at the different methods of removing the lice. One room was shaving kids' hair off. Another was dipping children into a bubbly liquid. I saw one room had monkeys picking the lice out of children's hair. I was being forced to walk on 2 feet to go along with Dib, and I dropped to 4 feet at the sight of the monkey room. My tailbone started wagging, and I looked up at the assistant. "We get monkey treatment?" I asked. "Wait, you actually want the monkey treatment?" the assistant asked me with confusion. "Yes," I nodded. "Best method I see. Then when monkey done, I eat him." "No, Liz," Dib told me as if I was a dog ready to chew up the couch. "No eating the monkeys." "Just one," I requested. "No," he repeated. I huffed. "You never let me do anything." "Sorry, I've got orders," the man said and shoved the two of us into a different room. This room had some sort of picking device and a tub of the bubbly liquid. "We gotta get out of here," Dib said while we both scratched at our heads with our front paws. He dragged me towards the blocked-off window. "Take your seats, licey children," a German voice said to us. We saw Karen standing by the chairs. "You won't get away with this," Dib shouted at her. "Get away with it?" Karen asked. "When I'm finished here, I'll be looked upon as a hero. You simply do not comprehend my work here, boy, and I do not have time to explain. Take your seat now." We finally surrendered and sat on the aluminum chairs. Karen started coming at me with a device and the shampoo that smelled of negative chemicals. I growled and snarled at her and her methods. "Keep away from me," I cried. "I deal with worse than this in life." "Hold still," she tried to command me, but I kept ducking out of her way. She eventually had to call an assistant in to hold me down. I kicked and snarled and cursed as Karen performed her painful ritual on my head. Dib watched on with worry in his eyes. When the treatment was finished, Karen turned to Dib. "Your turn." The classroom door opened to reveal another assistant. "Countess, you're required in B-Wing." "So much to do," Karen said to herself. "I'll be back." As she and the assistant ran for the door, Dib kicked a special brush to keep the door from closing all the way. "Liz," he said on his feet, "it's obvious this delouser's become mad with power." I couldn't respond. My head was in too much pain and agony. Much more pain and itching than before the horrible treatment. It felt like a sunburn on my scalp that was being poked with hundreds of tiny needles. Growing up feral, my immune system has gotten used to fighting on its own. It's never needed help from chemicals like the ones in the shampoos. The cure that Membrane gave me for my broken leg was entirely bio-friendly. I was only given a chemical-heavy treatment one other time in my life, shortly after being brought into civilization. That treatment had almost killed me. This shampoo felt similar to that experience. I was having a reaction to the chemicals. Dib! Dib! I could feel my face growing red and tears of pain and frustration ran down my face. It burns! Burns me! Make stop! Dib looked down at me as I rolled on the ground, rubbing and scratching my head. Oh no, Liz! Here, I forgot. Dib pulled out a travel-sized lotion bottle with an all-natural skin remedy. I laid still as Dib quickly but gently rubbed the oily substance onto my head. It didn't take care of much of the lice, but it was softening the blow of the chemical allergy. Once I was functional enough to stand up, we rushed out into the hallway. We passed a room with a sign on the door that read Immunity Research. That where Zim is, I said quietly to myself and Dib. The two of us peered through the window in the door to see one of the men talking to Zim and Bitters. He held up some sort of painful-looking device in his hands. I'm no different from the other humans, Zim told the man. I'm loaded with lice. They're simply, in my belly. Maybe you should just put me in with the normal filthy Earthchild group. The man came towards Bitters with the device and she growled. Take it from the child. She pointed at Zim. The man looked down at Zim and Zim smiled up nervously at him. Then he used the device to start taking bits of skin from Zim. Zim, I gasped with worry. That was kind of neat, Dib said after watching Zim get tortured. I shoved Dib in the chest for enjoying Zim's pain when we heard Karen's voice in the room across the hall. We rushed over and looked in the door to see Karen talking to an assistant over Gretchen. Forgive me, Countess, the assistant said, but 15 of the test subjects have disappeared. Hey, Gretchen tried to get their attention. Escaped? Karen asked. No, the man responded. They never would have made it past the minefields. They're just gone. Leave us, Karen commanded. Up the security. The final battle is upon us. The man disappeared and Gretchen looked at the woman with confusion. What are you talking about? She asked. An infestation of this size provides me with research opportunities I could only dream of before. I couldn't tell if she was purposely talking to Gretchen or just thinking out loud. Some will suffer, yes, but for the greater good. But these disappearances, this is something more. Perhaps the proof I've been searching for. Why are you telling me this? Gretchen asked, but was ignored. Proof of a mastermind Queen Louse, Karen continued. The queen of all lice, and I will stop it. Dib and I stepped away from the door. A lice queen? Dib said aloud. She's crazier than I thought. I looked at Dib and asked, crazier than alien determined takeover planet and decides to spend days in school? Dib looked at me with irritation. We have to stop her. Just keep quiet, Liz. I sneezed. Loudly. That was not quiet, Dib commented. An assistant showed up and we ran from him. I ran on 4s and it forced Dib to run somewhat bent over because of the handcuffs. We ran and then Dib pulled us into another classroom filled with children in lice-picking chairs. Dib looked out the door and I continued looking to see Karen teleport in while holding Gretchen up by the wrist. I knew you'd be trouble, Karen sneered at Dib. Karen pulled out another delousing device and wielded it at our heads, but Dib and I both ducked out of range. We backed away from the woman. This has to stop, Dib told Karen. You don't get it, child, she said angrily at him. No one gets it, but I will show you, all of you. Don't get it, Dib shouted. They're just lice, and your little treatment almost destroyed my friend's scalp. He gestured to me. You can't see the full extent of the problem, Karen told us. It's much bigger than you know. Lice Queen? I inquired. This place smells, said Gretchen. Can I have a soda? You just need to open your minds. You're insane. Dib started to sound like the classmates that call him crazy. There is no Lice Queen. At that moment, The floor beneath us began to shake. A large crack split the floor open and everyone started falling in. I started to fall in, but Dib held me up by our handcuffs. I clung to the edge of the giant hole and started whimpering, crying, and howling for my wolf mother. I howled for her to come save me, but I couldn't see her anywhere. All I heard was Dib's voice saying something like, "Hold on, Liz, I won't let you fall." I continued crying, and then the handcuffs slipped from Dib's tiny wrist, and I fell into the pit with the others. When I landed in the cavern below, I refused to get up or do anything. I crawled to the nearest wall and whimpered with my paws over my head. I didn't pay attention to what was going on, not when Karen and the children discovered the Lice Queen, not when one of Karen's minions brought in Zim to tell her that his skin destroys the lice, not when she fired liquid Zim's skin cells at the Queen and all the infected children. I wasn't paying attention at all. I wasn't mentally there at all, just shaking with fear. I wasn't brought back to reality until Karen sprayed me with Zim's skin and the itching ceased. I shook the liquid from me and looked at my surroundings. The Queen was dead. Everything was covered in blended Zim skin, and all the lice was gone. Thanks to the bravery of this child. Karen pulled an almost completely destroyed Zim from some sort of gun. The world will never have to deal with the threat of lice ever again. Zim started screaming in absolute agony. I ditched my spot by the wall and rushed towards them. "Dib," I barked up, "hand him over." Karen continued talking as she gently set Zim down in front of me. The poor little alien couldn't even stand up, his lower half was so destroyed. I had to carry Zim home on my back, where he'd instructed me on how to heal his destroyed body with the complex Arkan technology. This technology was starting to make human technology look like a set of squeaky toys. Chapter 23. My Abduction. The crisp, windy air was rich with the smell of rain. It had done just that the previous night. The rain made the land muddy and slippery. Mother and I were out walking, and I was splashing in the cold, muddy puddles up ahead of her. The rest of the pack were a good distance ahead of us. Mother and I always liked to take our leisurely time while moving about the territory. This annoyed the alphas, but they let it slide because I was usually too energetic to be around the others when they weren't playing. I always knew I was a little different from the other wolves, but I also knew that I was one of them. My mother didn't care that I grew up a bit slower than her other pups. She loved me, just the same as any mother loved her pup. I did my best to behave like the others. Heck, I didn't know how else to behave. It was all I knew. I waited my turn for meals like everyone else. I caught rodents when I could and gave them to Mother once in a while. A few I'd give to the alphas as a token that they would accept. I'd play with the other young wolves, and they happily let me play with them. It wasn't perfect, of course. Some nights we'd go hungrier than others. Some nights I could see the others protected by their thick fur, while I remained cold and had to snuggle up to my mother's fur. In the summertime, we'd all experience the mosquitoes and the ticks together. In the hot sun, my skin would burn and peel if I spent too long in the bright light. The others never had this problem, but they did seem to overheat easier than I did. Mother would lick my burning red skin with her big tongue to ease the stinging pain. Like I said, it wasn't perfect, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. I had pup friends. I had a mother who loved and looked after me. I had 2 strong alphas leading and protecting the pack that I was part of. Before the snowfall, our pack had encountered a large moose. All the adults fought bravely while us pups stayed hidden. The moose was eventually chased off, but not before kicking our alpha male at the time in the head, killing him. We all mourned and howled for him all through that night. By the next nightfall, our new alpha was established, and that's who was leading us now. My mother was originally alpha female up until my father died. After that, her rank dropped. I aspired to be just like her. so caring and sweet, yet so brave and strong. We walked along in the thinning, muddy woods. After a good hike, we were joined by a cliff that held the river just beneath it. The cliff wasn't frighteningly high, about as tall as some of the smaller trees around us. I bounded towards the cliff and started sniffing at the river and the fish below. I heard my mother give a warning whimper to be careful near the edge. I whined back in reassurance. We continued following the scent of the rest of the pack, with the cliff and river by our side. I was trotting only a few paws away from the edge and Mother was diagonally behind me. My back left paw landed on the mud, which then slipped out from under me. Before I knew it, I was clinging to the edge of the cliff. I started whimpering, crying, and howling for my wolf mother. I howled for her to save me, and saw her suddenly in front of me. Mother grabbed me by the neck in her strong jaws and tossed me inland. I landed on my side and looked up, just in time to see the land start to give out beneath my mother's weight. Her eyes were filled with a terror that I rarely saw within them. Mother started to sink down the edge of the cliff. She whimpered and whined and pawed at the mud that began staining her silver fur brown. I rushed towards her as she slipped all the way off the cliff. I whined loudly as I watched her splash into the rocky water below. I watched the water carefully, waiting to see her resurface. I saw nothing, no sign that she was coming up. I started following the flow of the river, watching closely. Come on, Mother, come back up. Let me know you're okay. You're okay, I know you are. Don't leave me, Mother. Don't leave me. I ran blindly with tears in my eyes. I ran along the river. I howled for help, howled for the rest of the pack, howled for my mother. I ran and howled until I tripped on my own front paws, landing face first in the mud. I stayed on the ground, up to my nose in mud. I sobbed and I whined. My mother was gone, just like that. Gone. I watched my father die at the hoof of a moose only a few moons ago, and now my mother was at the bottom of this river. Because of me. It was my fault she was gone. If I would have been more careful on the edge of the cliff. Death was not foreign to the pack. Newborn pups died all the time. Wolves grew sick and old and died. But this was my fault. It was all my fault. I didn't see or hear the rest of the pack at all. I was alone. Alone with death lingering in the air. Most of the world seemed silent. Only the rushing sound of that horrible river found its way to my ears. Birds had been singing and chirping only moments before. Now they were silenced. Even the wind that was so wild before was holding its breath. I sobbed and whined for a good long while. After plenty of sobbing, I slowly lifted myself from the mud. I shook the top layer of mud from my bare skin and looked back down at the river. Tears dribbled from my eyes and from my nose. I sat with my hind legs and started howling mournfully. A howl of grief and sorrow filled the forest around me. I became deaf to everything but my own howl. I howled longer and louder than I have ever howled before. I howled until it became tiresome to howl, and then I howled some more. I lowered my head and ceased howling when I truly no longer could. I finally turned away from the river and attempted to track the rest of my family. I hadn't traveled 20 paces when I heard a noise. I stopped in my tracks and looked around, my ears perked and my eyes wide. Then I saw it. A creature was hunched low to the ground. I knew this creature. I'd seen them before from a great distance. Bears and moosers and other wolves were deadly, but this creature was to be avoided completely, for no wolf or other animal of the forest could ever defeat them in battle. These creatures had two main forms of communication. They communicated with their mouths, with others of their kind nearby. This wasn't unlike the birds in the trees talking with one another. Their other form of communication involved a sort of instrument that could be heard throughout an entire forest. This instrument communicated with others that were much further away. It let other creatures know that they were dangerous and to stay away. These instruments made noises like thunder that were fatal. This creature tried to use its oral communications towards me, but I couldn't understand any of it. I couldn't see the thunder device on him at all, as he held out one of his front paws in my direction. I arched my back and started growling at the horrible smelling creature. If Mother was still here, she'd be protecting me, but now I was on my own and had to protect myself. The creature kept making a noise with its teeth and lips that sounded like a heavy wind blowing through the leaves of a thick tree. Shh, shh. The monster took a small step closer, and I took a half step back. I peeled my lips back further and growled louder, warning him to stay back. He didn't listen. He just kept making little sounds with his mouth that made no sense to me. Surely he could understand what a growl meant. Most creatures did. I had to show him that I wasn't playing around. He took another step closer and I leaped at the monster. He was so surprised that he fell back, and I landed on his chest. I bit down on the creature's neck, right over his windpipe. However, before I could do too much damage, I was pulled away by another set of arms. It was another monster. He had brought more to our forest and territory. How many were there? Hundreds, I was sure of it. I struggled for my life against the strong body that began carrying me away. I kicked and snarled and tried to bite at my captors. I howled, I barked, I whined for the pack to come stop them. My voice filled the entire forest that soon came to an end. In a dirt clearing, with a wide dirt path, there sat some sort of large mechanical monster. The first creature opened up the back of the monster, and the other threw me inside. The back area I was in was small and stunk like smoke and the tobacco plant. The two creatures closed up the back of the monster, and I was trapped. I kept howling and pawing at the back door while the two creatures sat in the front of the monster. The area I was in and the area they were in were separated with some sort of barred barrier. The monster we were in started growling, and I whimpered to show I was harmless. Then I heard them. The pack was barking for me. I looked out the clear barrier on the back of the monster to see the pack running towards us. I barked back in response and pawed at the barrier some more. But then the monster started moving, carrying me further and further away from my pack. They continued running after me, but they just weren't fast enough to catch up to this monster. I pawed harder and whined loudly as I saw my family disappearing in the distance. I continued whimpering long after they were gone, and then slid my paws down the clear barrier. I curled up on the floor of the monster's belly, terrified of what was in store for me. Surely they would slaughter me and devour my flesh. That wasn't right. Wolves didn't get eaten. Wolves did the eating of other creatures. What were these monsters interfering with the delicately balanced food chain? No, I wasn't going down without a fight. That's not what wolves do. I got up from my spot by the door and jumped at the bars that separated me and the creatures. I barked and snarled and tried to reach my paws through the bars to scratch at the creatures. My arms were short, but the space was just small enough to claw at one of the creature's ears. He barked in pain and held his ear with his paw. He turned towards me and barked something at me, probably a warning or a threat. I wasn't backing down. I continued growling and reaching for him again, but he moved out of my reach. I looked at the other creature who was holding a circle attached to the monster. I reached my paw towards him, but the other barked a warning and he moved out of reach without even looking at me. The two continued to sit just out of reach of my paws throughout the entire ride. I tried several other times to harm them, but gave up when I realized it was no use. After that I went to try to escape the monster by slamming my body against the walls and the clear barrier. The creatures kept barking something at me, but I wouldn't listen to them even if I could understand them. This went on for what seemed like forever, trying to break through, trying to chew through whatever I was in. During this time, I figured out that this monster I was in wasn't alive because it showed no signs of pain, even when I bit my hardest. Instead, this was some sort of transporting containment chamber. After I did all that I possibly could, I grew too tired to continue and I dropped to my belly. Not only was I tired, I was also hungry. I hadn't eaten since yesterday at all. I was so weak, so desperate. If these monsters didn't intend to kill me, surely they wouldn't mind feeding me a little. Once I had enough energy to get up, I approached the bars once again. The creature that wasn't holding the weird circle kept a close eye on me. Instead of going to attack them, I whimpered for food like me and the other pups would when wanting to be fed. The creature didn't seem to understand at first, but then he pulled out some sort of soft container and opened it. I could smell some turkey on the inside of the container and started shaking my tailbone and licking my lips in excitement. He held up a turkey leg and I started whimpering louder and begging for him to hand it over. He finally slipped the leg through the bars and dropped it in front of me. I picked up the meat and bone and carried it to one of the back corners of the transporter chamber to eat. I feasted like it would be my last meal, which is how the pack and I always ate. You never know when you're going to eat next, so you have to eat when you can. Not long after I finished, I fell into a well-needed sleep. Chapter 24. Our Abduction. Zim was downstairs talking with his tall alphas. I was upstairs with an old pork chop bone, gnawing at the bits of meat and fat that still clung to the bone's surface. I sat on the floor between the couch and the television. Gar was in the kitchen making more pork chops for us. Suddenly the doorbell rang and I jumped up from my bone. I got it! I got it! I barked for the whole base to hear before leaping towards the door. When I opened the door and dropped back to all fours, I saw something. Very, very poor human costumes covering two obvious aliens. I could smell their facade even through the door. Howdy, Shorty, said one of the aliens with a Fred name tag. We are here to vomit language with the young man who lives in this shelter unit. I stared up at the creatures and their horrible disguises. They made Zim's disguise look genuine. I started laughing and couldn't stop. How stupid were these things and how stupid did they think we were? Gar was suddenly at my side. What? We're not aliens, said the second creature with the Mary name tag. Oh, aliens, said Fred. That's a good one. The two started laughing and green pus spilled from their faces. You want some slaughtered pig? Gar asked the aliens cheerfully. I looked down at Gar. No, Gar. Oh, that sounds splendid, Fred said, and they walked right past me into the house. Zim not like this, I said to myself. The two aliens took a seat at the couch, and Gar went to get some more pork chops. I sat directly in front of them and stared suspiciously. Hi, Fred tried to make conversation. Nifty weather events we humans are possessing. Yes, agreed Mary. The weather has been very amusing. I kept staring at them until Gur came in with a plate full of pork chops. Who wants some? Ooh, I do. The aliens both started waving their arms in excitement. Gur squeaked over and set the plate on the couch between them before he started to hug one of the aliens' legs. Zim really not like this, I said to myself. Gur, The familiar angry voice appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. I looked up to see Zim in his disguise. "Who are you?" he asked the aliens. "Howdy!" Fred stood up from the couch. "Perfectly normal human worm baby." Is that the intergalactic wording for a human child or something? That's exactly what Zim called himself when he first introduced himself to the class. "We are your new neighbors," Fred explained to Zim. "You're wearing costumes." Even Zim wasn't falling for it. "No, we aren't," the sitting Mary said. "Those costumes, you aliens," I said to the two creatures. "Your ship is emitting an interference field, and it just interrupted a very important call," Zim told them. "To his tall alphas," I explained. "Most important." Right," said Fred frantically. "Plan 2. What's plan 2? Asked Mary, standing up. "Stuff 'em in a sack," commanded Fred, and the other unrolled a large sack. "Grr," Zim called. "Defensive mode." Grr saluted and then jumped in the sack with a squeak. "No worry, Alpha Zim," I told Zim. "I stopped them." I jumped at the two aliens, but they hit me over the head with the pork chop plate and I blacked out. I opened my eyes to see Zim, Grr, and I were on some sort of ship with the two aliens. "Foolish earthlings," said Fred. "You have fallen victim to our clever plan." "They sure did, Pa," agreed Mary. "You threw us in a sack," Zim corrected the clever aspect of the plan. Grr popped out of the sack and I started growling lowly at the two aliens. The last time two creatures captured me and brought me into their large, strange vehicle, they brought me into this dreaded civilization. I'm stronger now than I was then, and will certainly not let this sort of thing happen to me again. And definitely not to my best friend. "Silence!" cried Fred. "You have been chosen as the perfect specimen of the human race and will be added to our collection of life forms." "But," Zim began, but they interrupted him. The alien jumped in front of us and started waving a device in front of us that spelled out "Obey." "Do not attempt to resist us. We have spent hundreds of your Earth years harvesting the galaxy, haven't we? Adding to our collection." He gestured up to the hundreds of large glass tubes. Mary was polishing one of the tubes. "Well?" Zim asked. "Well, where are they?" "They escaped," Mary said without hesitation. Oh, Fred said. "Don't say that, it might give 'em ideas." "But I'm not human," Zim told them while removing his wig and lenses. "See, not human, only a brilliant disguise. I can see how you would be fooled, but—" "You are human!" Fred got in Zim's face. I growled and snapped at him, and he moved back out of my direct reach. "We have proof!" They gestured to a screen that showed us all in class. It was a scene that had happened only yesterday, and Dib ducked out of his seat. He appeared in front of Zim's desk and pointed. "I know what you are, Zim." Zim stood on the desk. "I'm human. Yep, human. Just look at my neck." The video stopped and the aliens clapped. "I was lying," Zim told them. "Surely you've heard of the mighty Urkin race." "We don't get that TV no more," Mary said. "I read a lot, though." "Read what?" I asked with a scrunched nose. "How breathe and not die?" I swear Zim almost started laughing. "How do you explain the dog, then, eh?" Fred asked. "Humans keep dogs as pets, and don't all humans have a best friend that acts like an animal?" "Yeah!" Mary cried after a long time of trying to form words. "The dog and the gal! Explain it!" Zim gestured to Grr, and I stepped aside so they could get a better look at him. This is Gur. He's disguised as a dog, you fools. Gur, cast off your amazing doggy ruse and show them your mighty robot form. Gur did a backflip that ended in him removing his hood and stripping the dog costume. Ew! Hi there! Gur waved excitedly. Would you look at that? Fred pointed in amazement. You see, Zim confirmed, and I nodded that they finally got it. Now if you could just... What a smart dog! Fred continued, and I face-pawed. Come here, doggy. He led Gur to one of the glass tubes where he calmly stepped inside. Oh, come on, Zim cried in frustration and finally turned to me in desperation. Liz, you and your speech patterns are almost as inferior as these misinformed fools. Explain to them that I am not a filthy human. I was almost becoming as numb to Zim's comments as Dib was numb to Gaz's. They sort of hurt the first couple times that that's what he thought of me, but I've come to realize and accept that that's just his way. It seems the only creatures he fails to insult are his superiors, the tall alphas and even Miss Bitters. He even speaks of his equal Arkans in a manner somewhat poorly. I guess it's no different than when wolves play fight with one another. I took a step forward. Zim mighty Erkin, I explained. He comes school with disguise that I smell through soon as he enter room. Look, me Earthling, Zim not Earthling. See difference? I was starting to know how Dib felt. You can't fool us, Fred responded. You're humans, and you will make fine additions to our collection. Could you maybe just drop us off? Zim asked. Impossible, shouted Mary. We've gone past the point of no return. But my house is right down there. Zim pointed through the glass floor to the greenhouse below. We can probably just jump onto the roof. Wait, you're hovering over an Earth neighborhood in plain sight? Do you think we're stupid? Asked Fred, offended. Well, I tilted my head. Thought did occur to us. Shut up, cried Mary. Now you've hurt my feelings. We're not stupid, Fred confirmed. We're using advanced cloaking technology. Our ship is disguised and completely unnoticeable. But enough philosophy. But we haven't been talking about... Let the hideous experiments begin, Fred interrupted Zim. He started waving a roll of duct tape around while sipping a box of juice. We will begin by fusing you to another human being, Mary said while approaching Zim. What other human? Zim asked in irritation. This rude one, of course, Mary gestured to me. I widened my eyes in surprise and exchanged glances with Zim. Mary held us down while Fred taped my right leg to Zim's left leg and my right arm to Zim's left arm. Great. Now I have to be upright again. Oh, incredible, Fred commented. Incredible work. Success. Oh, what should we do next? Mary wondered. Oh, let's fuse him with this juice. No, argued Fred. I think we've already proven our mastery of the fusing technology. While they continued arguing, Zim and I looked around for an escape. We saw a small escape hatch and silently headed towards it. It was only big enough to fit one of us at a time, so I quickly broke the tape with my teeth and tried to slip in. However, Zim and I were both a bit too big. It wouldn't have even been close with Dib's giant head. The humans are escaping, Fred cried as Zim was trying to fit through. Get them! The two aliens approached us and Zim distracted them by pointing up. To my amazement, it actually worked, and we slipped through the large door of the room. We ran through a hallway filled with glass tubes and climbed a ladder up to a catwalk. We ran silently, just trying to find a way out. I ran at Zim's heels as we passed a gray and purple door that Zim went back to. He opened the door and I followed him into a dark room with more tubes. There must be some way off this stupid thing, Zim said as we gazed out to the large room. Hello? My ears and Zim's antennas picked up a voice. Hello, over here. Zim and I went down to the floor of the room and looked among the tubes. I sniffed along the ground until my nose led me to a tube that held a fleshy blob with various objects attached to him. I barked for Zim to come over, and he did. Hey, what are you? He asked the creature. I don't even know anymore. The blob threw his stubby arms in the air. They fused me so many times. Everyone else they kidnap escapes, but I'm so heavy now, so disgusting. What's this thing? He gestured to a toy moose on his head. Zim pushed me aside and got in the creature's face. How did they get away? The creature pointed to the ceiling. That duct up there leads to an emergency escape ships. The creature kept talking as Zim released his pack legs, grabbed me by the waist, and carried us to the hole in the ceiling. Despite the situation, Zim's arm wrapped around me gave me a feeling of protection. So strong for such a small creature. I hadn't felt so safe since the last time I cuddled up to my mother. When he set me down inside the pipes, I had to remember the objective at hand, and was almost left behind. Through the pipes, Zim and I crawled. We looked out every vent to see where the escape room was. We crawled, both of us on all fours, until we were over the room with the two aliens. And what if the juice had made them more powerful? Did you ever think of that? Fred was asking Mary. Whoa, Mary said defensively. Wait, are we talking about the same juice? Zim and I continued to crawl forward until we found the room with the escape ships. We opened the little door and looked inside. What about Gur? I reminded Zim. Zim pulled out his communicator and commanded Gur to come to him. Less than a minute later, the door of the room opened to reveal both Gur and the two aliens. I grabbed Gur and jumped into the escape pod while Zim followed. The escape pod began to shake, and Zim and I both took a seat in the only large chair available. A countdown started in front of us until it reached 0, and then just dropped us on the front lawn. We opened the hatch, and the three of us went inside as if nothing happened. Well, Zim reported to his tall alphas on the findings of the newly discovered dumb species. Chapter 25. Chickenfoot. I guess Fred and Mary went on to capture Dib that day after we escaped. Luckily, it was easier for Dib to defeat and escape from them than it is for him to defeat Zim. Today we're watching Mysterious Mysteries together. We were both sitting up on the couch to watch today. Dib ordered Chinese, and I was nibbling one of his old chicken bones while he was taking notes on the case of the floating fork. Next on Mysterious Mysteries, the host went on, the mysterious, the horrible Chickenfoot. The screen showed what was obviously a man in a chicken outfit acting like a chicken and digging through a dumpster. Wait. Dib set down his notepad and pencil. Looks like a guy in a Mr. Chicky-Licky suit. You can see the zipper. Aw, I said in disappointment. Large chicken would be good feeding. The chicken man pulled out a discarded chicken toy as the door next to the dumpster opened. The chicken man freaked out and slammed into the fence right in front of the camera. That is a guy in a Mr. Chicky-Licky suit. Dib pointed at the screen. What kind of idiots do they think we are? At that moment, the front door opened to reveal Membrane floating in on screen, with other floating screens following. Hello, children, Membrane greeted us. I'm giving these world leaders a tour of our home. The various screens started floating around the house and looking at everything. I removed the chicken bone from my mouth and started scratching at my ear with my foot. A screen with an Asian leader dropped in front of the two of us. Who is the big-headed boy and the girl that looks like she smells like the zoo? The Asian leader asked. Membrane floated over. This is my son Dib and his girlfriend Liz, he explained, and I shot straight up at these words. The future of the Membrane Empire. I glared at Membrane as the other leaders surrounded us. I'm not his girlfriend, I growled. Besides, Dib went on, correcting his father's words, I'm actually a paranormal investigator. They're both a bit insane at the moment, but they'll get over it, Membrane explained. Dad, Dib exclaimed. Paranormal investigation is a legitimate field of study. At that, Mysterious Mysteries decided to ask an expert about the so-called Chickenfoot. Chickenfoot is not a real chicken, said expert Bill. He's a space chicken from a planet where pig demons rule. Anyway, Dib muted the television and awkwardly looked around at the world leaders. Paranormal investigator? The Asian leader asked. Your son and his girlfriend believe these things? Are the rest of the people in your country crazy like these children? He started laughing and I started growling. The other leaders started laughing too and I could sense Membrane's embarrassment. We'll discuss this later. And he started to float off with the others following. But I don't believe in Chickenfoot, Dib defended. And I'm not his girlfriend, I barked at the Asian leader. Dib threw his Chinese down angrily, and we both sat with anger until they were all gone. Mysterious Mysteries is getting desperate for ratings, Dib said to me at last. This Chickenfoot story is undermining everything paranormal studies stand for, that I stand for. It must be stopped. This be like old days, I commented with a half grin. Oh yeah, Dib agreed with an even bigger smile. Just like old times, Liz. So the two of us went to the chicken joint to find a crazy man demanding slaw he already had. What kind of chicken do you children want? The goth girl asked us when we stood in front of the counter together. Actually, Dib turned to her as the slaw man continued arguing with the other employee. We want some information on Chickenfoot. The entire restaurant went quiet at his words and stared at us. Even the slaw man backed away from us. The goth girl came back to the counter by us, looking very frightened. Don't say that name round here, she told us. He is the demon beast. We lost 3 chicken cookers since he come round. He killed them? I asked. No, the girl said. They got better jobs. But I hate that chicken beast. Get out now, before you get better jobs too. The other man behind the counter rushed over. Maria, don't make a scene. He calmed down the goth girl. He then looked at us and pushed open a drawer of chicken legs. Now, children, perhaps you should try a Mr. Chicky meal. Are you thirsty for chicken? I rose from 4 paws and put my fronts on the edge of the drawer. I smelled the chicken, but Dib pulled me away from the meat. Don't try to throw us off track, he told the man as I sat on all 4s again. No, the man defended. The chicky meal. It comes with a dirty chicken toy. Dib picked up the toy chicken from the drawer. He lowered the item for me to sniff it in his hand as the man continued. The head comes off and can be used like a little grappling hook. Indeed, the head came off with a string attached to it. With ease, the head reattached to the body. A year ago, I would have thought this thing a bit strange, but with everything that's happened since Zim came to Earth, this is the most normal foreign item I've come across in moons. That's a weird thing for a chicken to do, Dib said. That dirty chicken has a secret, the man said and gestured for us to follow him to the back of the restaurant. So the 3 of us went back to the old chicken freezer where the man turned on the light and shut the door. I started sniffing around the small area as he and Dib talked. Okay, what's the secret of Chickenfoot? Dib asked. Ask the dirty chicken, the man told him and held up the toy. What is the secret, dirty chicken? Dib finally asked after hesitation. Chickenfoot is a mass of chickeny evil. The man stood up straight. I stopped sniffing around and joined Dib at his side. The man squeaked the chicken in his ear some more and continued. He has come back to avenge the souls of his chicken brothers. The man spun around and made a bunch of dramatic spooky noises as the light bulb flickered. Oh, come on, Dib argued. It's a guy in a chicken suit. Don't you have any hardcore facts? I want facts. The man hid behind a barrel of lard. Don't hurt me. They say Chickenfoot lives in an apartment on 3rd Street. The massive chickeny evil has no apartment? Dib asked in the light blue. I snatched the dirty chicken from the man and carried it in my mouth. I loved how it squeaked like a squeaky toy or a mouse. Very satisfying. Dib and I went down to 3rd Street to find an apartment building. I was biting on the squeaky chicken toy while Dib was trying to find Chickenfoot's name. No Chickenfoot! He exclaimed after going over all the names. The old man lied to us, Liz. Just then a man in a trench coat walked up to the door and into the building. Excuse me, he said as he stepped right over me. I lifted my head as the door closed behind him to see a heap of feathers left in the man's wake. Hey, Dib said suspiciously. Come on, Liz. I grabbed the chicken toy in my mouth and the two of us pursued the man all the way up to his apartment. Dib kicked open the door and I dropped the chicken toy in the doorway. Give up, Chickenfoot, Dib yelled. We got you now, I yelled as well. Wait, the man approached us. You want Chickenfoot? See, I'm Turkey Neck. He undid his coat to reveal many chins that did look like that of a turkey. Chickenfoot's 2 doors down. Why run from us? I asked the man. I thought you were some of those darn kids after me lucky neck meats, he explained. They're always after me neck meats, don't you know? I picked up the chicken toy in my mouth again and Dib and I both took a step back. You see me neck meats? The turkey man went on. They're lucky. I shoved Dib out the door with my head and we went towards Chickenfoot's door. This place reminds me of your foster parents' place, Dib told me while looking around. Good thing you'll be moving out of there and in with us. I stopped in my tracks. Yeah, I still hadn't told him yet. Dib didn't notice I stopped and he stopped in front of a door. This must be it, he said, gazing up at the door and then finally noticed me. What's wrong, Liz? I lowered my head and dropped the chicken toy. Dib, I not move in with you. Dib turned all the way towards me. What? Why? Well, I began. It's because of Zim, isn't it? He accused. Dib, isn't it? He demanded with more authority. My eyes lowered and stared at the ground. Can we talk later? I finally asked. We almost find Chickenfoot. Fine. Dib crossed his arms with irritation. This conversation definitely isn't over. With that, he opened the door and I carried in the chicken toy. The apartment was dark and smelled awful. I never smelled anything so repulsive. I stopped at the edge of the threshold because of how bad it smelled while Dib walked right in. I whined at the smell and took a couple steps back. I bit down harder on the chicken toy, and it squeaked. Finally, I took a deep breath and entered the apartment, breathing through my teeth. A peep of chickens. That's actually what a group of chickens is called, fun fact, like a gaggle of geese or murder of crows. A peep of chickens fluttered out at us and through the door behind me. I had to restrain myself from chasing after them. Instead, I looked up at the straw-covered couch at the smelly man in a chicken outfit. Chickenfoot, Dib said in amazement. Go away, the man cried, and turned away from us. Don't look at me! I dropped the chicken toy again and told the man, We just talk. Don't look at my face, he said again. Dib picked up a chicken leg from the ground. What happened to you? The chicken man gazed into the distance. It's a sad, sad, revolting tale. I was once a man, just like you. I worked in a chicken restaurant, just like you. Neither of us works in a chicken restaurant, Dib corrected. Don't look at me, the man repeated. We weren't, Dib began, but I nudged him. Go on, I told the chicken man. So he told the story of some dishwater that splashed on a microwave he was standing next to, and somehow it turned him into a chicken man beast. The explosion probably just stuck the zipper, Dib said when the story finished. I could pull it loose. The chicken man stepped away from Dib. You speak madness, boy. Like he not hear that before, I responded. Every day that goes by, I grow more and more grotesque, the chicken man went on. That's because you don't bathe, Dib answered. I can confirm, I confirmed. I can't even leave the apartment anymore. Rodriguez made his way to the window with many other chicken toys. Now the chicken meal toys are my only friends. My one regret is that I never got the dirty chicken toy. Dib and I both widened our eyes as I picked up the dirty chicken in my mouth once again. You mean this? Dib asked, pointing to the contents of my mouth. The chicken man started demanding we give the chicken toy to him, and he launched at me, but Dib stepped between us. Hold on. Only if you come to the hospital with us. I think we can put an end to this once and for all. The three of us went down to the nearby hospital. Man, I hate hospitals. Professor Membrane is the only human medical professional I trust to treat any of my injuries or illnesses. Chickenfoot was sitting in the room with me and the doctor, while Dib was calling mysterious mysteries out in the hallway. I had given Rodriguez the chicken toy when we arrived and was sitting on the floor as the doctor tried to explain the situation to the delusional stink man. What do you want, kitty cat? What? What do you want? Can you leave me be? I'm still working. Go away. No matter what, he was still in denial. The doctor herself went to undo the zipper, and he freaked out. He ran out of the door and down the hallway, screaming that he was a freak. And the cat is now doing other stuff. Sorry about that, the cat demanded my attention, and I just couldn't say no. Let's try to finish this. It's really hard to want to chase someone who smells that bad, Dib said as we both ran after him. I ran on all fours a few feet in front of Dib. Chewie tripped over a gurney and a man in a wheelchair, dropping the chicken toy. I easily leaped over all the obstacles and past the dirty chicken. I heard Dib stop at the toy behind me. Chickenfoot! He cried as me and the man kept running. Come back! You're not a freak! You're just stupid! I followed him out of the hospital and into the parking lot. He started hopping around and acting like a chicken. Chewie! I stopped and called to him as Dib stopped beside me. I know how you feel. We can help you. I know I'm delusional. I know my body is not a wolf, but I still act like it is because... Beside me, Dib pulled the beak from the dirty chicken and threw it onto the zipper of Chickenfoot's costume. Chewie didn't notice and ran back inside the hospital, dragging Dib by the cord. I chased behind both of them until some doors closed on Dib and the dirty chicken. I shoved the door open just in time to see Chewie jumping out of the suit with the mysterious mysteries crew surrounding him. The curse is lifted, Rodriguez said with tears. Thank you. It was just a costume, Dib said with irritation. This just proves that paranormal studies isn't a bunch of crazies believing in anything. We also disprove the frauds. Right, Liz? That right, I nodded. However, this made the others believe that nothing paranormal was real. Dib and I went back home that night, but I was too tired to walk all the way back to my foster's house that night. Instead, I somehow fell asleep on the membrane's couch with my head in Dib's lap. Chapter 26. Listen up. I was awoken by the spray of soda in my face. I looked up to see Gaz holding a can of poop soda and glaring. You two are hogging the couch, she said, annoyed. My head was still on Dib's lap, and his hand had been resting on my shoulder. We were both asleep until Gaz woke us, and I sat up to see Dib looking just as surprised as I was. I jumped off the couch, and Dib got up as well. Gaz took her seat on the couch and turned on the television. No wonder Dad thinks you two are a thing, Gaz said while sipping her drink. Dib and I both started towards the kitchen, and Gaz shouted over her shoulder, I made bacon for your dumb faces. Indeed, there was a pan with 4 strips of bacon that Dib gave me 2 of. That was something last night, huh? Dib finally asked when he took his seat with a bowl of cereal, and I sat on the floor next to his chair. Yes, I agreed with a yawn. How could someone think they chicken man? And go all that time without taking a single shower, Dib continued. Wow, that guy stunk. Mm-hmm, I nodded. Apartment horrible. Hey, Dib said with a spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked down at me with a somewhat furrowed brow. That reminds me, we have a conversation to finish. A conversation about why you won't move in with us. I grinned awkwardly. Now? Yes, now, Dib told me. You won't move in because of Zim. I narrowed my eyes slightly. Not just Zim. I've been with no family a long time now. For me suddenly be part of family? You don't have anything to worry about, Liz, Dib reassured. I shook my head. Dib, I still not know exactly what I am. I wolf, but I girl. You not know what that like. No one know, except Chickenfoot. He knew. You're smarter than he is, Liz, Dib told me calmly. We'll help you figure out what you are. I'll help you. You know, in our house you're welcome to behave like a wolf as much as you like because we know how important it is to you. Zim lets me behave like a wolf as well. We're both fish out of water in this human environment. Dib realizes the importance of my behavior, but I don't think he quite understands it as well as I'd like him to. Not as well as Zim does, anyway. I'm just not ready for this, I told Dib grimly. You'd rather continue living in that pigsty with those people that don't even care about you? Dib asked. Liz, I will protect you here. I will protect you with my life if I have to. Dib stood to his feet and I took a step back at the sudden movement. I'll protect you from stupid little green aliens and from ghosts and vampires. I'll protect you from anything and everything this universe throws because I... Dib stopped himself and there was a long pause before I broke it. Joining family mean I accept me in human society. Mean I never go back to pack. I'm not ready for that commitment. I'd hoped you wouldn't need to go back to the pack again, Dib sighed. But I guess I'm not going to convince you anytime soon. Of course, you know, our door will always be open to you, Liz. I hope you'll see this as your home too someday. I smiled and lifted my front paws to land on Dib's chest. I gave him a lick on the cheek and he smiled at that. Thank you, Dib. I lowered myself back to 4 paws. As Dib was wiping his cheek with his sleeve and sitting back in his chair, my wrist began buzzing. Dib's smile vanished in half a second and was replaced with a deep frown. I answered the watch to see Zim looking very irritated. Wolf monster! Zim shouted. Where have you been? I've been trying to contact you all night. It was an emergency, you know. Sorry, Zim, I apologized. I shut off watch at hospital. It interfered with medical equipment. Hospital? Zim repeated with worry. What happened? Are you hurt? Hospital not for me, I chuckled. Dib and I had to take care of a friend. Dib widened his eyes a little at the mention of his name, and Zim's narrowed at the same time for the same reason. I see. Well, not that you'd care, but there was an emergency with Gur, but it's all taken care of now. What happened with Gur? I asked. Before Zim could answer, Dib stepped in with that taunting voice. What's wrong, Zim? Can't get control of your dumb little robot? You're still there with him? Zim screamed. I thought you weren't moving in with that filthy giant-headed little... Actually, I interrupted. I just leaving. Bye, Dib. See you tomorrow. As I ran for the door, Dib waved after me with disappointment. Yeah, see you at school, Liz. Bye, Gaz, I barked as I ran past her. Whatever, she said simply. I ran out the front door and down the block a ways before looking back at my wrist. Sorry, Zim, I repeated my apology. I just told him I'm not moving in. I come over right away. I shut off the watch and ran home. I mean to Zim's house, where Zim opened the door at my arrival. It took you that long to tell him you weren't moving in? Zim asked after I entered the house. We talked about this last week. Why did you wait until now to tell the stinkhuman no? I had to think right way tell him, I told Zim with a shrug. Perhaps it should have been Zim to tell him this. Zim suggested with a fist. Not matter. I shook my head. Over now. What happened to Gur? Is he okay? Don't worry about him, Zim reassured with a wave of the hand. I tried to lock him into duty mode last night, but for some reason he decided to betray me in that state. Can you believe that? Who would ever want to betray Zim? That's terrible, I said as I followed Zim down to his lab. And he okay now? Yes, he's fine. Zim rolled his eyes. Why are you so concerned with Gur anyway? I shrugged. He all you have when I'm not here. Zim stopped what he was doing when I said this. Yes, he finally agreed over his shoulder at me. I suppose he is. I hate think what you do something happened to him, I went on. I know he not most useful, but he always here for you like I is. Zim sighed and turned to face me. Come here, Liz Wolf, he commanded. I approached on all fours and looked up at the Urkin. I could feel my heart beating in my throat. I tried to say, yes, Alpha, but what came out was a shaking, Alpha? Zim put his hands on his knees and bent down so that his eyes were level with mine. Don't ever turn off your communicator again, he told me in his most serious tone. This time I said it with success. Yes, Alpha Zim. I was worried about you, you know, Zim said with somber as he brushed a strand of hair out of my face with his gloved finger. I not realize, I responded in the same tone. Yes. I thought maybe you'd left again, Zim said with his eyes now avoiding mine. He suddenly stood up straight and started speaking in his normal voice. Anyway, I need your help on an experiment, Liz. Okay? I need you to stand right over there. Zim pointed to an empty corner of the room. On 2 feet, please. I readily obeyed, trotting to the corner and standing on 2 feet to face Zim. Zim picked up a pair of strange-looking goggles and placed them on his face. What's that? I asked. I'm using these X-ray goggles to study your anatomy, Zim explained. Very interesting parts you Earth monsters have. Zim knows I don't like to be called human, so he substitutes Earth monster instead. X-ray? I asked. Yes, Zim nodded. I can see right through your clothes. My clothes? I squealed and put my paws over my chest as I hunched back towards the ground. Zim, I thought you were looking at organs or bones. Zim grinned and pushed a button on the side of the goggles. I am now, Liz, but why would I want to look at your organs? I've already collected an organ from every child in our school except for you. I know your organs better than you do. Take those off, I barked angrily. What's wrong? He asked, removing the goggles from his head. Don't you trust Zim? I removed my paws from my chest and approached Zim on all fours again. No look at me without clothes! I didn't know why this was getting to me so much. I had spent 6 years of my life completely naked. I only wore clothes now because it was basically beaten into me to wear them. Not to mention Zim saw me without clothes when he and Tib came after me in the forest. Zim set down the goggles while still watching me with his eyes. Very well, he said. I stared at him for almost a minute. Both our brows were furrowed, not really knowing what to do with the awkward situation. Then my eyes landed on the goggles behind my friend. I quickly jumped towards them and grabbed them before running to the other end of the room. Hey! Zim shouted after me. What do you think you're doing? I turned and put the goggles over my own eyes. I get even, I told him while staring with a grin. Zim scowled and put his hands on his hips. I saw under his clothes completely. No gloves, no boots, no pants, no shirt thing. Only his pack remained with the goggles. The rest of his body was as green as his head. I didn't see much in the case of genitals. What occupied his crotch looked more like a dark green nipple. I've only seen one set of male human genitals in my life. and I find them disgusting based on that experience. What I saw on the Yearn almost disappointed me. How could one possibly mate with that? I removed the goggles after I'd taken in the sights, and furrowed my brow at Zim. "Zim," I asked, "how Yearns mate?" Zim came over and snatched the goggles from me. He put them back in their case, that he took them from, as he spoke. "Yearns haven't mated the way Earthlings do in hundreds of years. Our kind is cloned and grown in a sort of tube thingy. Our so-called sex organs are dormant, but kept intact in case something goes wrong with the cloning machines and we need to resort to the old disgusting ways of breeding." "Oh," I said simply when he had finished. "So you not have sexual desire?" Zim hesitated. No, we don't." "I see," I said, looking to the side. Perhaps a mate wasn't the most important thing I could get out of Zim. I would still be by his side no matter what, even if we couldn't bring each other that sort of pleasure, and I'm quite certain we wouldn't be able to have pups with our very different biology. I suppose Gur will have to be the only pup between the two of us. Chapter 27. Doomed? Zim and I sat together at lunch, trying not to be disgusted by the dark green something that was in front of us. Even I wouldn't eat something so strange. Zim was taking it to a whole new level. He was wearing goggles and an extra set of protective gloves as he tried to investigate the substance. Things have been interesting between the two of us since the whole X-ray goggle thing. It was like we couldn't quite look at each other the same way anymore. We had exposed ourselves to each other in a way that I hadn't expected us to at this point. We still talked to each other the same as we always do, still spent the same amount of time together as before. In fact, we might even be spending more time together than we had been. It was just that our relationship was altered in some way I couldn't quite explain. An elephant in the room, if you will. Zim poked at the green bile with his spoon before realizing nearly the entire cafeteria was staring at him. He removed his goggles and purple gloves before picking up his spoon again. I wasn't eating a single bite of this stuff, even if I was commanded to do so. Zim scooped the goop into his mouth and sat there for a moment. He then started coughing the substance up and tearing up. "Delicious! Delicious!" he cried and stood on the table. "I'm normal!" All the other children moved away from us, so Zim continued poking at the poor excuse for food while I watched. Suddenly, a muffin flew out of nowhere and hit Zim in the head. While I sat beside him, Zim and I both looked around. "What? Who?" he cried. Zim snatched the muffin from the table. "Who did this? Who dares to soil my normal boy head with this pork cow?" "That's a stinking muffin!" shouted Punchy from the next table. "Silence!" Zim shouted. "Whatever this is, I will find the beast who threw it. I will find you. Sleep peacefully now, for it will be the last peaceful sleep you will know from this moment on." "But we're not asleep right now," another child shouted from the crowds of the cafeteria. "You silent," I barked at the child. "Come, Zim, we get our revenge." Zim and I left the cafeteria, Zim still carrying the muffin. "The evildoer of this horrible deed could only be the dibstink," Zim said, holding up the muffin. "I have a plan to get him to admit to this horrible mistake. Come, Liz." We ditched the rest of the school day to go back to Zim's house to begin his plan. Zim started up this virtual reality simulator, and we waited until night to move the sleeping Dib into the simulator room. I sat with Zim in the observation deck to see the simulator simulate these alien creatures called microbes, give Dib strange powers. The microbes put him to sleep when they were finished, and the simulator changed today. Dib entered the kitchen where Gaz was eating her burnt toast. He put his own slice of bread in the toaster and sat down with a large smile on his face. "What an amazing morning, isn't it?" he chimed. Gaz spat toast crumbs in his face and he wiped them away. "No, really, something's different." Just then the toast flew out of the toaster and Dib buttered and bit into it in midair. The buttered toast landed right on the plate and Dib landed on his feet. "It wasn't a dream," he said, looking at his hands. "I really was chosen." Professor Membrane entered the kitchen. "Son, you're looking in good spirits today. You must have finally seen the light about studying real science." "No, Dad," Dib corrected. "These alien shoes came into my room and gave me some kind of gift. I know how that sounds, but it's true." Dib demonstrated by somersaulting through the air to the fridge. He opened the fridge where he grabbed a carton of orange juice and a glass. He held the glass upside down above the OJ as the OJ defied gravity into the glass. Dib drank and then allowed the carton and glass to float back into the fridge. "Those aliens were demented hallucinations," Membrane said and held a device to his son's head. "But your DNA does seem to have evolved beyond that of a normal human being's." Gaz said, coming into the conversation. "I guess I'm sorry for being so mean to you all those times, then." I whispered to Zim in the booth. "Gaz not so nice. Off character." "Shh!" Zim put his finger in front of his mouth and continued the simulation. This is just incredible," Dib said with glee. I should see if whatever this is really will help me deal with Zim. I'm going to head over to his base. Hey, I'm speaking out loud to myself in an unnatural manner. Oh well." So Dib flew towards Zim's house, where he dodged all the lawn gnomes and landed in front of the purple door. He knocked and was greeted by the simulation Zim in disguise. "Huh?" "I've got a few things to tell you, Zim," Dib said to Zim, and then told him a few things. He finished with, "And that's all I have to say about that." Okay," Zim responded and went to get his things. Gur joined him at his side in front of the door. "I can't argue with that, Dib. You've won. I'm giving myself up to the Earth authorities. Best of luck to both you and Liz and all your future endeavors. It's been nice working with you, Gur. Now self-destruct." "Finally!" Gur cheered and laughed before exploding. I whispered to Zim again. "Where I at?" "You'll see soon. Now be quiet," Zim whispered back. The Zim in the simulator climbed into a police car that took him away. Dib was left in front of the base alone. "This feeling," he said to himself, "the power, it isn't going away. Things really will be different for me from now on. At last! Yeah!" A short while later, Dib was being interviewed on television. "You've opened the world's eyes to the existence of aliens, Dib," said the reporter. "Now what?" "There are many other mysteries still unsolved," Dib responded. "I figure, I'll do some of that." "Dib!" The simulation me finally showed up. She ran on just as I would, and started hugging Dib in front of the cameras. "Dib, oh, you so brave, Dib! You right all along! Zim evil alien, and you save us all!" Dib hugged me in return. "Aw, it was nothing, Liz. Somebody has to protect this planet, am I right?" He flashed a shiny smile at the cameras while I went on praising him. A few years in the future, I helped Dib to discover some ghosts. He presented them to several news teams by pulling down a curtain. There they were, Shakespeare, Abe Lincoln, and some janitor. The crowd was amazed. "Dib rocks! Oh, I love you, Dib!" "That my Dib," I said to Dib in the cameras. Another few years later, I was at Dib's side as he revealed some lake monsters. "And to prove that the lake spooky monster is real, this task force has granted me permission to drain the lake." A button appeared and Dib used his energized hand to slice the button. Within seconds the lake drained to reveal a series of grotesque monsters. "That my Dib," I said to Dib in the cameras. "My Dib?" I repeated the words to Zim in the booth. "Do not question Zim," he told me. The time jumped so that Dib and I were 30 years old, and we went to visit Zim in his little tube. "Dib!" Zim shouted at our entrance. "It's been years, Zim." Dib said to him. 20 of your years, to be precise, Zim specified, enduring these indignities. The only reason I have not tried to escape is because it amuses me. Hello, wolf child. I chuckled and waved to the alien. Me not child anymore. Dib continued. Amuses you to what? Ah, yes, the invasion, Zim said. I didn't say anything about the invasion, Dib told him. Just let happen, Dibby, my simulating self told Dib. Dibby? I said the word to Zim in the booth. What's going on here? I'll explain later, now be quiet, Zim told me in the booth. You didn't? Simulation Zim asked Dib. Well, you were supposed to. Well, they'll be here. The Armada will come, and there's nothing you can do about it. We'll see, Zim. We'll see. Dib responded and then dragged me out the door by my arm. It was maybe 20-ish years later when it happened. The Armada had arrived, and it was time for Dib and the rest of the Earth to fight. Though I was still in Dib's life, I wasn't going to be directly involved with this battle. Instead, I was in charge of keeping an eye on Earth, and leading the Earth animals into battle if Dib's army failed. Luckily, Dib did not fail. He brought down the Massive and the rest of the Armada. He had saved the Earth once again. Dib landed back on Earth, on the platform with the President and I. We stood before a crowd of praising humans and many Earth animals. Behind us, the Massive crashed into the ground and snacks landed everywhere. Dib was given an award by the President, and I wrapped my arm around his waist. That my Dib, I said to Dib in the cameras. Now Dib and I were 70 years old. An elder Dib was being interviewed for a great talk show, and an elder me was sitting in the very front row. You've lived quite a full life, haven't you, Dib? The interviewer asked. Yes, Alan, Dib responded. It was everything I could have ever hoped for, and more, and I even got to ride a moose. Everyone awed and clapped, including me. Of course, Dib went on, it wouldn't have been the same if I didn't get to share it with someone special. And I did. I got to share it with my beautiful, amazing wife, Liz Membrane, and our 9 children. The crowd clapped again, and a tear slid down my wrinkled old cheek. In the booth, however, my jaw had dropped, and I was speechless. Zim had set it up so that I had married Dib. That's why I was always at his side. That's why I always said that my Dib, and called him Dibby, and wrapped my arms around him like that. I was his wife? Is that how Zim sees us? He sees Dib and I as mates? No, I could never marry Dib. How could Zim think such a thing? I was used to Gaz and Professor Membrane accusing us of such, but not the person that I really did want to spend my life with. Yes, well, Alan continued the interview, we thank you for sharing your incredible life with us and for allowing the human race to survive. Oh yes, Dib nodded. You're welcome. Oh, and if I may say, Alan said with curiosity, there's one final question that would settle the curiosity of your many fans. Did you throw the muffin at Zim's head? Dib looked a little bashful and chuckled nervously. Wow, that's going back a long way. As a matter of fact, I did. Aha! Alan's head suddenly turned into Zim's, along with the entire crowd's, including my own. They all laughed at Dib, and soon the simulation ended. Dib was sitting in a chair, and he was 11 again. He looked incredibly dumbfounded, and I didn't blame him. I would have been laughing alongside Zim, but I was still in shock myself that he had made me Dib's wife. I knew it! Zim shouted at Dib. I knew it was you! What? Dib asked, looking up at us. Get out, Zim said, and Dib headed for the door. Oh, just one more thing. Zim pushed a button. A large weapon came out of nowhere and aimed itself at Dib's head. I stood to my feet, but for some reason didn't feel all that compelled to save Dib this time. The weapon charged up and then launched the same muffin at Dib's head. Dib wobbled to the door as Zim laughed maniacally. Before he exited, Dib looked up to the booth at us. "You stink, Zim." Then it was over. Dib was gone and Zim had his revenge. Zim continued laughing and then stood from his seat. "I have been a great success, haven't I?" "Zim." "Now come, my dear Liz." Zim ignored my soft voice. "Zim. Come and let us—" "Zim!" "What?" Zim finally looked my way. I had been on 2 feet since I stood up at the weapons entrance. Now I lowered myself to 4s and took a couple steps closer to Zim. "Why? Why you make me Dib mate?" "Oh, that," Zim said, looking to the side. "Well, what else was Zim supposed to do with you, Liz? It was just a stupid simulation." "But not accurate," I told Zim. "I never married Dib. I not love him." Zim's antennas perked up and he looked back at me excitedly. "You don't? That's great, Liz. I mean, good. He's a filthy stink beast." I chuckled. Stupid humans. Chapter 28. Valentine. Valentine's Day? Ha! I've never cared for the background or the meaning behind Valentine's Day. However, I must say I enjoy the tradition of receiving free meat. Every year Dib gives me a big slab of raw venison steak, and I give him a dozen weenies from Delicious Weenies. I'm unable to consume the weenies from Delicious Weenies myself because there are certain chemicals in the ingredients that make me sick. I wanted to get something special for Zim this year, but I know meat burns him. One time Zim and I were play wrestling, and I had him in a tight hold when Gurr decided to discover the digital camera. He snapped a couple of pictures where we were laughing and my arm was around Zim's neck. Last week, Gurr and I went to get the pictures developed. I framed one of the pictures and that's what I was going to give to Zim at the end of the day. I kept a second framed picture for myself next to my bed, so I see it every day when I wake up. Miss Bitters was on the phone with the principal. "No, no, no! You'll pay for this one." She slammed the phone down and it burst into flames and disappeared. "Class, despite my moral outrage, the principal is allowing you to celebrate Valentine's Day this year." The children started cheering and flying about the classroom in an excited frenzy. I started shaking my tailbone with anticipation for the meat. "Go ahead," Miss Bitters said. "Pass out your Valentine's meat slabs. It's traditional." Dib and I always exchange our meat at the end of the day, so I gladly and readily accepted the meats from everyone else. I was also able to enjoy the Valentines given to Zim. I gave everyone else some raw sausages, also from Delicious Weenies. "Miss Bitters," Dib raised his hand, and I looked over to see Gretchen piling heart-shaped steak after heart-shaped steak on his desk. "I read that long ago people used to hand out cards and candy on Valentine's Day. How did the whole meat thing get started?" "You don't want to know," was all Bitters told him, and I continued scarfing on my heart-shaped salami. "I had a Valentine once." There was an interruption and the phone told Bitters something she didn't like. "Another one. To celebrate overcrowding in school, a new student will be joining the class." The last time a new student joined us, he changed my whole world. I was so glad he had chosen our neighborhood and our school and our class. And the fact that there just happened to be an empty desk right in front of me was simply too perfect. Whoever this new human was, I didn't care. I had all I could ever want in terms of friends. A ship landed outside. I recognized the Delicious Weenie mark on the side of it. The door of the ship opened, and out stepped a girl with short purple hair and her red-eyed cat. The cat scurried on the windowsill and sat in front of Dib, who stared. Seconds later, the girl was in the doorway of the classroom, and I smelled something strangely familiar about her. "Hi, my name's Tack," the girl said in a high accent. "I'm new here." "Hello, Tack," everyone said except me, Zim, and Dib. Tack stepped into the classroom. "My dad's the head of the delicious Weenie Corporation. That was his jet out there," she explained and began reaching into her backpack. "So I brought Valentine's weenies for everyone." Endless weenies flew from her bag and the other children consumed them. I watched them eat those sickening things and gagged. How can people enjoy that filth? I'm sounding more and more like Zim every day. Not that I'm complaining. "Except that kid." Tack jumped on the teacher's desk and pointed at Zim. "Weenie Schmeenie," Zim said. "Zim needs no meats." I nodded sharply and smiled. "For him," Tack continued, "I have prepared a poem." "What?" The ham fell out of my mouth. "Looks like Zim has a girlfriend." Sarah pointed and bit her weenie. Before I could start growling, Tack ripped her paper in half in anger. "It's not nice to embarrass people. You should apologize and eat your eraser." "Yes, Tack, I'm sorry, Zim." Sarah apologized and bit into her large eraser. To my dismay, Tack began her poem. "For longer than I can remember, I've been looking for someone like you, someone with a head like yours and a torso too. Birds singing, you're gonna pay, the end. Here's your meat covered in barbecue sauce." She took out a rack of ribs and threw them at Zim, who started smoking and screaming. I instantly jumped on Zim and ripped the ribs from his ribs. I tossed them aside and started licking the sauce from his torso as Bitters was giving a seat to Tack behind Dib, and Brian was replaced with Poochie. At the end of the day, Dib gave me my venison, and I gave him his dozen weenies. Although I was thinking of boycotting the company altogether. How dare she read that poem to Zim in front of everyone and throw that meat out to him? Lucky I was there to clean him up, or who knows what would have happened to my friend. Zim and I walked home with my deer meat in my mouth. We entered the greenhouse and I put my meat on the kitchen table. I was about to give Zim my present. "I'm going down to report to my tallest, Zim. Liz," Zim told me as he stood in his toilet. "But I began, but Zim had already flushed himself down. Some moons ago I had discovered that I could listen in on Zim's conversations with his tall alphas from the house. There was a vent in the floor behind the armchair next to the couch, so I took my deer meat and sat behind the chair while listening. "My tallest," Zim's voice said. "Please excuse my appearance, I mean no disrespect. A new child." "Oh," I heard Gur's voice. "You're not. Be quiet," Zim shouted and continued. "My tallest, a new child attacked me with meat. My conclusion, she's in love with me." "What? No!" I shot up from the ground and dropped my meat. I came back closer to the vent and continued listening. "This may prove valuable because I can use the child to learn more about human affection," Zim explained. "There was another creature that I thought I might be able to learn this from, but she doesn't have the mind of a human. I assume her affection would be different from this new child's." "That's great, Zim," another voice started. I had decided to call the different voices Robin and Squirrel. Squirrel was the one currently talking. "Sounds great." I heard what sounded like Robin laughing. "Don't worry, that's just my arms flailing and giggling." "Stop it! Stop it!" "And once I am done with the child, I will destroy her," Zim said, and I sighed with relief. "The child with the wolf mind is a bit too important to my survival on this otherwise disgusting planet. Her saliva seems to possess healing qualities I have not come across before." "Okay, Zim," Squirrel responded. "Well, we have another call." A few minutes later, Zim came back up to the house, and I acted as though I didn't hear a thing, as I usually did. "Zim," I smiled, "you back. Here, I have thing for you." I pulled out the picture in frame and handed it to Zim in my teeth. Happy Valentine's Day. Zim took the picture from me and looked down at it with disinterest. Oh, thanks, Wolfchild. Grr, put this somewhere. That was strange. This didn't have anything to do with Tack, did it? Even Grr almost looked sorry for me. The next day I arrived to school with Zim, where we saw Tack sitting on the fence with Dib and talking. Zim went over to trying to make Tack his love pig. I found Gretchen crying at a picnic table. I didn't usually interact with her, but my only two friends were busy with her. Besides, my mother would have gone to comfort the girl, and I did want to try to be like my mother, after all, other than taking over the earth anyway. Gretchen? I jumped on the seat beside her. Are you okay? What wrong? Gretchen sniffed and wiped her eyes with her tissue. Oh, Liz, you're friends with Dib, I know that. But look at them, look at her. She pointed to Dib and Tack. I realized what she meant, and I put my arm around her. She accepted my comfort and cried into my shoulder. Gretchen, I know how feel. Zim think Tack love him. Not fair. She not love him. But I sure she not love Dib either. What's her problem anyway? Gretchen asked me with sobs. Why does she have to come to our school and our class? Why does she have to steal the guys that we like? I not know, Gretch. I rubbed her shoulder. But Zim say he use her and destroy her when done. What? Gretchen looked at me worried. I thought fast. Emotionally. Destroy her emotionally. Break her heart. Good, Gretchen pouted, 'cause Dib broke my heart when I saw him with her. I looked over to see Tack slam a wastebasket on Zim and laugh with Dib. Oh dear, Zim's going to get the wrong idea of what human love is like. Well, actually, based on my experience, that's exactly how humans show affection. One of the main reasons I refuse to identify with them. So the weeks went by and Zim continued to try and win over Tack, and Tack continued to abuse Zim. After a while, I stopped hanging around with Zim and Dib almost completely. All they ever did was talk about that stupid Tack. I hated her. I hated her more than I hated my therapist. I hated her more than I'd ever hated anyone before in my whole life. Well, there was that one human I had to hate more than the others. The only person that shared my hatred for Tack was Gretchen. She became one of my new best friends. We sat together at lunch, and I went over to her house a couple of times. Her parents were all right, but didn't really know how to react to me. When we weren't talking about how much we hated Tack, we did talk about our crushes. Chapter 29. Shocking Reveal. During those weeks that Tack was torturing Zim and stealing Dib from Gretchen, I had another visit from my therapist. I told her about Tack and how she was abusing my friend, and he thought she liked him and all that. She concluded that I'm jealous that Zim's attention is directed on Tack. Well, no shit, I could have told you that. Anyway, she said that if it's upsetting me so much, that I should have a civil conversation with Zim about it. I also told her about Gretchen and how we bonded over this common enemy. Okay, I didn't use those exact words, but I did tell her we became friends because we both don't like Tack. She said she's glad I made another friend, and a girlfriend of all things, but we shouldn't bond over negative things. Anyway, I decided that I would try to have a conversation with Zim, so I walked home with him today. Tack had taped a kick-me sign on Zim's back that day that I had pointed out to him. We entered the house to see Grr standing on his head. He jumped to his feet at our entrance. I feel like it's been forever since I've seen the little robot. Wolfie! He shouted and jumped to hug me. Taco Pup! I cried and returned the hug. Zim closed the door behind us. I feel I now know enough about this human affection, and I hate it, Zim said. Zim, I said, putting Grr down. I want to talk about that. Just then the doorbell rang. Zim put his hand on the little pad on the door so he could see who it was without opening the door. There stood Tack. I glared in the direction of the door while Gur jumped into his dog suit. I backed away and hid behind the couch. Zim opened the door, and that horrible little cat slithered around the room and sat in front of Gur. I hate cats. Stupid little creatures think they're so high and mighty. I especially hated Tack's cat, for obvious reasons. The cat rejoined its owner by the door. From my position I could only see Gur, but not Zim or Tack or the door. "Okay," Zim said. "Tack, I'm glad you stopped by. It gives me a chance to end our hideous relationship and enjoy your shrill cry at having been rejected by Zim." "You have got to be kidding." I heard Tack's horrible accent finally speak. "I assure you I am very serious," Zim responded. "Now cry! Cry like you've never cried before." I was glad to know that Zim was finally trying to end his so-called relationship with Tack, but now I still had to convince him that her abuse wasn't appropriate affection. I heard Tack laughing a high, irritating laugh. She laughed, and then I heard some digital noises that hurt my ears, and I dug my claws into the floor. I still couldn't see Tack or Zim, but I could hear Zim gasp. "What? You're Erkin," he said in disbelief. "What is this?" I felt my eyes grow wide, and I bit down on my tongue as this continued. "You're a bigger fool than I imagined," Tack said. "Eh?" was Zim's response, as I predicted it would be. I know by now that Zim is incapable of comprehending words of put-down directed at him. He is the almighty Alpha Zim, after all. "You're a bigger fool than I imagined," Tack repeated. "Eh?" Zim also repeated. "You're confused," Tack said. "Allow me to explain. It was 50 years ago on the military training planet of Devastus. I'd been waiting years to take my final test to become one of the Erkin elite soldiers, and should the need arise, to be one of the invaders." Tack told the story of how Zim blacked out half the planet because of a dysfunctional vending machine. The blackout locked her in the testing facility, which caused her to fail. Whatever the control brains were, they didn't allow Tack to take the test for another 70 years. She was sentenced to clean on a planet of dirt. She then hunted down Zim to this planet, and made the weenie man her fake father. Yes, Zim exclaimed at the end of the story. "You blame me for your horrible life, blah, blah, big deal. This is about taking your mission, Zim," Tack told him, "not revenge." "You're after revenge?" Zim asked. "No!" Tack shouted with annoyance. "It's not about revenge. It's about taking what is rightfully mine. I should have been an invader. I should have been part of the Great Assigning. I shouldn't have to be stealing this planet from you." "You're after my robot bee!" Zim cried. "No!" Tack cried, still irritated with Zim's failure to understand. "Listen to me. Listen carefully. I'm a better invader than you could ever be. I blend in perfectly. The plan I have in store for this nasty rock will so impress the tallest that they'll have no choice but to make me an invader." I couldn't take it anymore. Prey hides, but a wolf and an Erkin faces their enemies. I finally jumped out from behind the couch and placed myself on all fours between Tack and Zim. I growled up at her, finally seeing her Erkin form. I had never seen another Erkin besides Zim and his tall alphas. Tack looked different in many aspects, but similar in others to Zim. She had the same green head, and she wore a pack and gloves, but her eyes were purple and more narrow than Zim's. Her antennas were longer and curled more at the ends. Her uniform was long and purple instead of Zim's red one. I growled at the Erkin that dare lead Zim on for almost a month and abuse him with so little mercy. This Erkin that come here and thinks she can steal Zim's mission? Tack looked down at me with boredom. Oh, she stated, I see you've got your little pet to fight for you. Well, two can play at that game. Mimi, show this mutt how to be defeated by your superior fighting skills. Mimi tackled me, and we began fighting. There was only one other time in my life where I tried to fight something that couldn't feel pain. I hated it. I hate when I have to fight something that can't feel pain. Mimi had all the weaponry that Gur had, but I didn't know about. Gur wasn't a fighter. He was an eater and a hugger. Play fighting with other wolves was nothing like fighting a robot like Mimi. She tackled me, but I threw her off me quickly. Before I could get back on my feet, she tried to come at me again, but I kicked her away. Zim, Tack, and Gur all watched the brawl. I got back on my feet and jumped on Mimi. I brought my fist down on her, but her metal skull was too strong for me. While Mimi was unaffected by my powerful punch, the collision with her metal put my paw in severe pain. I yelled and recoiled from the robot. Mimi drew her hand back and it collided with my face. I fell back to the ground, seeing stars which turned into my mother's beautiful wolf face. I shook my head to bring myself back to reality. I saw Mimi standing over me with her hand now a strange weapon that I couldn't quite identify. I reached out my good paw and grabbed Mimi by her neck. However, she brought her weapon down on my shoulder and I found out what it was. This was some Irken Sur unit equivalent to a taser. The electric current coursed through me and I screamed. Mimi finally pulled away and I was left weak and unable to move. I heard Zim's voice cry, "No!" I panted heavily and saw the taser on Mimi's hand exchange for what looked like a small flamethrower. "That's enough, Mimi," Tack told Mimi, who finally stepped away from me. I was in too much of a daze to truly understand what was going on around me, but I collected that Tack was trying to destroy the base around us. After she was gone, Zim was at my side. Liz, are you all right? Talk to me. Zim, was all that exited my lips. Grr, Zim shouted. Liz requires first aid. Do what it takes to help her. For once, Gur actually obeyed and did his job correctly. I was back on my feet in a few minutes, even though my paw was still sore from punching Mimi. Oh, Liz, Zim hugged me tightly when I was back to normal. I'm so glad you're okay. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you. I'm sorry I've been ignoring you for Tack all this time. I'm so sorry. I had never known Zim to give a deliberate hug or apology like this. Usually when he's in the wrong, he blames someone else, but this time, he was being genuine. I wrapped my arms around him and held him tight. It okay, Zim, I whispered. We here now, Zim, we here now. Zim suddenly stepped away and cleared his throat. Yes, well, good to have you back, Wolfchild. Now we must find a way to stop Tack. Sometime later, Zim, Gur, and I finished battling a ham demon. What a horrible adventure with that ham demon! Woo! Zim said when it was over. But we've made no progress in figuring out what Tack's plan is. The base is still repairing itself, and the only other person with the facilities to... No, I won't even consider it. Zim, I put my paw on his arm. We must go to Dib. It only way. Never, Zim shouted. I'll never seek help from that filthy, big-headed Zim! I barked with more aggression, and Zim looked down at my eyes. Please. Zim groaned. Fine, just this once. So early in the morning we arrived at the Membrane house to find Professor Membrane. Membrane, of course, knows me about as well as he knows his own children, but Zim was a relatively new face at his household. Ah, Liz, Membrane exclaimed upon opening the door. Haven't seen you around here in a while? And you must be the little foreign boy my son is always talking about. Come on in. Zim and Membrane sat and talked at the table while drinking coffee. Even I sat up at the table next to Zim today. It was rare for me to sit at the table at the membrane house, because I prefer the floor. But today it was a bit too important to be sniffing people's feet. At last, as Dib entered the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Zim!" Dib shouted at seeing us. "Good morning, son," Membrane greeted. "Your little friends are here to see you." "Dad!" Dib jumped and started pointing at Zim. "That's the alien! The alien!"
"Of course he is," Membrane chuckled and headed for the door. "You kids have fun."
"What's going on, Zim?" Dib stood on the table. "It seems the enemies have a common enemy," Zim explained. "Tack." "Very common enemy," I agreed. "She's an Urkin and she's after my job and your planet," Zim continued. "Oh, come on," Dib responded. "I like Tack, and she hates you. Plus, she actually is interested in what I have to say, unlike some wolf people." "I never said I'm not interested in what you say, Dib," I defended. "Please," Dib said. "You two are just jealous." Zim jumped on the table as well. "This has nothing to do with Jelly. We've been trying to figure out her plan, but it's been difficult. She's good. Not good like me, but still good." "Of course not good like Zim," I told Zim. "This is just stupid," Dib said to himself. 48 hours of trailing Tack, and all we could come up with are these photos we wrestled off that ham demon." Zim held out the photos to Dib. "They're of a giant evil weenie stand her father has constructed." "I hate those horrible weenies," I growled the same way Zim growls about the angry monkey show Gur likes to watch. Dib took the photos. "Giant weenie stand is weird, but it doesn't say anything about Tack. Giant weenie stand. That's worth a look." "So Dib help us?" I asked with excitement. "Does he really have to be involved?" Dib pointed to Zim. "She'll destroy your world," Zim cried as Gaz entered the room. "And when the earth is in a smoking ruin, you'll wish it was me who had done it." Gaz sprayed her soda at Zim, and he started screaming and steaming. He freaked out until he jumped out the window by the sink and ran off. "Thanks, Gaz." Dib looked at me. "Look, Liz, if you really are serious about this, we can take a look at—" "Ah!" Gaz sprayed him with soda as well. I wasn't staying around and waiting for Dib to come to his senses. Instead, I went with Zim to actually do something as soon as possible. Chapter 30. Heartache. "What we do now?" I asked Zim. "No worries, wolf child," Zim said with confidence. "I've placed a tracking device on the Dib stink so that we can follow him." "Okay," I responded. "For what?" "Isn't it obvious?" Zim asked. "We'll wait for him to do the hard part of finding his way into Tack's giant weenie stand and infiltrate based on his location." "That could take hours," I argued. "Do not question Zim!" Zim screamed. Sometime later, the tracking device showed Dib was inside the weenie stand, and he had gotten in through some secret entrance. We took the Voot cruiser and found our way to the secret entrance Dib was behind. We blasted a hole in the wall and stood to see Dib, Gaz, and Tack. "It's over, Tack!" Zim shouted, and we jumped out of the hole and onto the floor. "The earth is mine to devastate, and I already promised the moon to Gur." "Zim! Liz!" Dib shouted in surprise. "How did you know we'd be here?" Zim turned to Dib while I kept an angry eye on Tack. "I placed a tracking device on you." "Tracking device?" Dib repeated. "Where?" I heard Dib searching himself and then Gur say, "Your head smells like a puppy." "I see you've recovered rather quickly, mutt," Tack said to me. "Dib and his sister may be a bit smart for this, but there's no way you're smart enough to resist." I saw a light flicker in Tack's eyes and almost forgot why I was here. Then the memories of seeing her torturing my Zim flashed across my mind and I was back. I growled. "What? How?" Tack shouted. "You're stupid! You couldn't possibly be smart enough to not be hypnotized." "Good thing about being wolf," I told Tack. "Eyes, not dominant sense." Tack hissed. "Stupid mutt! But this won't stop me from keeping my promise to the tallest. Mimi, attack!"
Down a chute the cat slithered. "No," I said, "not you again." Mimi transformed into a robot and held Dib up by his face before throwing him off the platform and down a vent shaft. Mimi then eyed me and Zim, and I wasn't sticking around to be tasered by this robot a second time. I ran for the hole in the wall and leaped onto the cruiser. Mimi chased Zim, who soon joined me. Mimi then threw Gur at us, and the cruiser crashed on the ground. We crashed next to the dumpster where Dib was at, and he started snapping at Zim. "Ugh!" he exclaimed. "You ruined everything, Zim. I was about to find out what her plan was." "Me? You're the one who refused to—" "Hey," Gaz interrupted Zim. "What's this thing?" "That's a Sir Unit's memory disk," Zim said, looking at the device. "It probably has Tack's plan all over it." "Perfect," I barked. "We find out her plan." Zim started reaching for the disc, but Dib jumped between him and Gaz. "No way, it's ours." Dib shoved Zim. "Back off." "Dib," I barked. "You idiot, quit being pup and hand over disc." "I'm the only one with the technology to decode the files," Zim said to Dib. "And we're the ones with the files to be decoded," Dib countered. "And I'm—" Gur tried to join in but just laughed. "I don't know." "Boys," I barked as loud as I could, "we all work together. We take disc to base and find out plan." "Let us see the base, Zim," Dib said to Zim. "As soon as we destroy Tack, I'm gonna feed your brains to my robot," Zim said to Dib, and they went head to head. "Deal," Dib said, and I rolled my eyes at their petty fighting. Minutes later, the 5 of us were going down one of the elevators to the base. "Huh," Gaz said, unimpressed. "This is your base?" "Don't touch anything," Zim warned the membranes, "or I'll melt your face off or something." We walked across the pathway and stood before the large screen. Zim inserted the disc in one of the slots. Within seconds, Tack's green face appeared. "My leaders," she was saying, "I offer a gift to prove my worthiness as an invader. I have created a magma pump to hollow out the Earth's molten core." The screen showed a digital diagram of the Earth being hollowed out. "I could do that," Zim said out loud. "Once empty," Tack continued, "I'll fill the planet with snacks as an offering to my tallest." "Your leaders are just taller than everyone else?" Dib questioned Zim. "No judge, Dib," I told him. "Alpha wolves must be big and strong to lead pack." Tack continued, "With the maple impossible to find, Earth has no value to you, but I shall make it valuable again." "She stole this plan from me," Zim said. "She did not," I said as Gur said, "No, she didn't." "Be quiet," Zim shouted, and then the Earth started shaking. "Computer!" "What?" the computer said as if it was a burden to disturb it. "Ready the voot. I must stop Tack," Zim commanded. "Her little joke has gone far enough." "I come with you," I started tailing Zim. "Tack and I have unfinished business." "Wait," Dib also called. "You have to drop me off at the weenie stand. Someone has to shut the pump off." The 3 of us squeezed into the small cruiser and flew off. We flew towards the weenie stand where we saw magma being pumped out of it. The hatch in the cruiser was opened, and Dib was dropped off below. "There!" Zim pointed to the edge of the pump where Tack was laughing maniacally at her work. "Let me at her! Let me at her!" I growled and barked out the window of the cruiser. We flew towards her, and she turned and noticed us. She jumped in her own ship, and we chased her up the magma spout into the outer atmosphere of Earth. I looked down at the globe to see it deteriorating. I hoped that the wolves were all right. As Zim flew through the magma field chasing Tack, I began putting on the Irken space travel suit. Zim had introduced me to the gear during our time on Mars, so I was relatively familiar with the equipment. Zim hadn't noticed I was putting the suit on until I stood beside him. I looked out the cruiser and saw that Tack's ship was beginning to go crazy, and I swear I heard Gur's voice coming from it. "Zim, I called out without taking my eyes off Tack's ship. "Open cruiser." "I don't take orders from—" I grabbed Zim by the shirt and growled. "I said, open the damn cruiser." "Very well," Zim said, and opened the cruiser just long enough for me to exit. I used the jets on the boots of the Irken suit to fly towards Tack's ship until I landed on the windshield. Indeed, her robot had blue eyes and was behaving like Gur. "Mutt!" she shouted upon seeing me. "Get off my ship!" In that moment, I thought about everything this monster did to me, Zim, and Gretchen. I thought of how she read that poem to Zim in front of the class and threw barbecue ribs on him. I thought of Gretchen crying when she saw Tack and Dib talking. I thought of how Zim kept calling Tack his love pig. If anyone should be his love pig, it should be me. I brought my mind and my body back to the day I watched my father die at the hoofs of a moose. I went back to seeing my mother die because of me and that horrible river. I remembered how I was when those men captured me and took me from my home and my pack. I went back to that time in my life when I was savage. Despite my right paw still being a bit sore from trying to hit Mimi, I raised both my front paws above my head and gathered all the strength I had in them. I brought my paws down on the glass, and a crack slithered about the windshield. "No!" Tack cried upon, but the robot kept her busy enough not to repair the glass. I drew my paws away and gathered my strength for the second time. This time the glass broke a hole big enough to stick my paw through. I peeled the rest of the glass away until I could squeeze into the ship. "You fool!" Tack cried again. "You foolish mutt!" I squeezed through the hole and landed on the ship's dash. I sat there on all fours and snarled at the enemy Irken. I think Tack had put on the invisible air helmet before I completely broke the glass, and that's why the vacuum of space hadn't killed her yet. Fate had left her to me. "You stay away from me, you filthy mutt!" Tack shouted at me. "What do you want?" I could only growl 2 words. "Zim, mine," before I completely engulfed myself in my savage instinct. I leaped on top of the Irken, shoving her robot aside. I landed with my claws digging into her shoulders. I heard Tack's high scream as I ripped the flesh from her chest with my powerful teeth. Layer after layer of green flesh, followed by her light pink meat and blood. Every piece of meat that I tore from the Irken's chest I threw to the side. Tack was still alive, as I ripped the equivalent to a single rib from her insides. She screamed louder as I shoved my face into the hole in her chest and wrapped my teeth around the beating equivalent to the Irken heart. I held the organ in my mouth and yanked it from the strings it was attached to. Tack looked up at me and the contents of my mouth with shock and horror as she breathed her final breaths. Her breath stopped, with purple eyes still wide, watching her killer. Clear pink blood dripped from my lips, and I continued to hold the heart in my mouth as it pumped for the last time. I gazed down at my work, proud of what I had just done. I had finally gotten my revenge on my greatest enemy. I had finally killed an enemy on my own. The girl who stole Zim's attention from me, but abused him. The girl who made Zim think that love was abusive instead of what it truly is. This planet belongs to Zim and I to conquer, not her. I brought myself out of my savage mode just enough to set the coordinates of the ship to the center of the sun. I then squeezed out of the hole in the windshield and flew back to Zim's cruiser. He let me in, but he had a look of amazement on his face. I dropped the heart of our enemy at Zim's feet, signifying that he was the Alpha, as Tak's ship flew towards the sun. I smiled up at Zim without regrets, and he stared down at me with disbelief. We were then interrupted because the magma started sucking itself back into the earth. Did it, I said joyously, and then corrected myself. We all did it.